The Nintendo Switch Pokemon games added a ton of crazy new Pokedex entries. This is a compilation of videos I made covering every interesting new dex entry added in Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet. There won't be any dex entries from Let's Go or BDSP because those dex entries weren't new, they were repeated from older games.
Greetings, Spooky fans! Michael here, and I finally got around to reading every single Pokedex entry in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Yes, all of them. My efficiency was aided once I acquired the sacred texts. As I did that, I compiled a list of all the Pokedex entries that I thought were the most interesting, because they were surprising, or funny, or disturbing, or taught us a really cool new fact about a certain Pokemon. I will now present that list to you, along with commentary that is sure to enrich the mind and enliven the soul. Or do neither of those things. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I'm almost to 1 million subs. Okay, we can start now. Thwacky's Shield entry says when it's drumming out rapid beats in battle, it gets so caught up in the rhythm that it won't even notice that it's already knocked out its opponent. This is hilarious to me because while Thwacky could just be banging its drumsticks on nearby rocks or something like that and ignoring the unconscious Pokemon over there, I kind of like to think that it's doing that drumming on the enemy Pokemon, so it's just beating the crap out of it while it's already unconscious, and it's beating a dead horsey if this is done after the expansion passes come out. Sobble's Sword entry says when scared, this Pokemon cries. Its tears pack the chemical punch of 100 onions, and attackers won't be able to resist weeping. I'm no scientist here, but 100 onions? Like, one is enough to make you bawl. 100 might just make you go blind. Blipbug's Sword entry says, a constant collector of information, this Pokemon is very smart. Very strong is what it isn't. I'm including this because I think the completely unnecessary shade thrown on Blipbug is quite funny. Grubbin's Sword entry says, its natural enemies, like Rookie D, may flee rather than risk getting caught in its large mandibles that can snap thick tree branches. I thought this was interesting because we now know that Rookie D and Grubbin are enemies. So that's cool. Corvisquire's Sword entry says, smart enough to use tools in battle, these Pokemon have been seen picking up rocks and flinging them or using ropes to wrap up enemies. I like this dex entry because I think that's a really cool thing for Corvisquire to do. I feel like most Pokemon that use tools in battle are ones that have the tools just as part of their designs, like Farfetch'd, for example. But Corvisquire will throw rocks that it finds or pick up ropes and tie them up, like, that's just fun. Thievel's Shield entry says, with a lithe body and sharp claws, it goes around stealing food and eggs. Boltund is its natural enemy. This is another dex entry I like because I love the ones that reveal a connection between two different species of Pokemon. So we know that Thievul and Boltund hate each other. Isn't that fun? Next is Dubwool, and I think both of its dex entries are interesting. Its Sword entry says, weave a carpet from its springy wool, and you end up with something closer to a trampoline. You'll start to bounce the moment you set foot on it. This makes no physical sense, I don't think, because in order for something to bounce, it has to flex downward and then flex back up. And if it's just on flat ground, I don't know how it would flex down far enough to bounce you, but even so, the idea is hilarious. And its Shield entry says, its majestic horns are meant only to impress the opposite gender. They never see use in battle. That's another interesting fact. It's got these big, gnarly looking horns that it could definitely impale somebody with, but it just doesn't. Purloin's Sword entry says, it steals things from people just to amuse itself with their frustration. A rivalry exists between this Pokemon and Nickit. So the fully grown fox hates dogs, but the baby fox hates cats. Budu's Sword entry says, the pollen it releases contains poison. If this Pokemon is raised on clean water, the poison's toxicity is increased. I think that's fascinating. I would have expected that the worse the water, the more potent the poison, but I guess the healthier the plant is, the more it can fight enemies. Alolan Ninetales' Sword entry says, a deity resides in the snowy mountains where this Pokemon lives. In ancient times, it was worshipped as that deity's incarnation. This one is fascinating to me because it doesn't just say, rumors say that there's a deity in the mountains. It just flat out says, there's a deity there where Alolan Ninetales is, which is like, okay, confirmation of some kind of spirit. That's cool, I guess. Vanillish's shield entry says, it blasts enemies with cold air reaching negative 148 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing them solid. But it spares their lives afterward. It's a kind Pokemon. This one, it caught me off guard. It's like, yeah, okay, vicious fighting cold air stuff. Oh, it spares their lives. It's kind. Wow. Good for it. Snorunt's shield entry says it can only survive in cold areas. It bounces happily around, even in environments as cold as negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I think this entry is interesting because the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth at ground level is around negative 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means there are environments in the Pokemon world that are colder than the coldest temperature ever on Earth that we recorded. The Ice Age could have been colder, but we weren't recording it. So I just think that's interesting and surprising. Well, I guess not that surprising. If you've got tons of ice Pokemon that can just blast temperatures colder than that all the time, you're gonna end up with really cold areas. Next is Dwebble, and I think both of its dex entries are interesting. When it finds a stone appealing, it creates a hole inside it and uses it as its home. This Pokemon is the natural enemy of Roggenrola and Roly-Poly. This is funny to me because it makes sense. You know, Roly-Poly and Roggenrola are rocks. It makes sense that they wouldn't like the Pokemon who might see them and be like, ooh, a fresh new home. And its shield entry says it first tries to find a rock to live in, but if there are no suitable rocks to be found, Dwebble may move into the ports of a Hippowdon. I love this. I think it's adorable that a Hippowdon can be wandering around and it just has cute little Dwebbles living in the ports on the side of it. That's just fun. Crustal's shield entry says its thick claws are its greatest weapons. They're mighty enough to crack Rhyperior's carapace. This is shocking to me. Like, Rhyperior is an armored thing, and apparently just these claws from a bug Pokemon are enough to crack it. Like, holy crap. Golet's shield entry says this Pokemon was created from clay. It received orders from its master many thousands of years ago, and it still follows those orders to this day. This I think is interesting because I don't know how practical it is. How could a Golett still be trying to carry out orders that were given 1,000 years ago? Like, that's just wild. Next is Golurk, another one where I think both of the dex entries are interesting. Its sword entry says artillery platforms built into the walls of ancient castles served as perches from which Golurk could fire energy beams. That is so freaking cool. Instead of lame catapults on your castle walls, you would just build platforms for a Golurk to stand on and blast laser beams at the enemy. That's freaking sick. And its shield entry says there's a theory that inside Golurk is a perpetual motion machine that produces limitless energy, but this belief hasn't been proven. I love the nod to a physics concept here. If you didn't know, a perpetual motion machine is something that can never exist because the idea is that it creates energy from nothing, which is impossible. So the idea that a Golurk could possibly be creating energy from nothing, that's just cool. Masharna's sword entry says, when dark mists emanate from its body, don't get too near. If you do, your nightmares will become reality. This doesn't just say that you'll be stricken with terrible nightmares. It says your nightmares will become real, like as illusions or hallucinations, or is this Masharna just going to create horrifying things out of nothing? Like, that is disturbing and just weird. Snover's shield entry says the berries that grow around its belly are like ice pops. Galarian Darumaka absolutely love these berries. I think that's adorable. Snover grows ice pop berries on its body, and Galarian Darumaka is like, oh, this is tasty, let me have some. And that actually leads into the next entry. Abomasnow's sword entry says if it sees any packs of Darumaka going after Snover, it chases them off. swinging its sizable arms like hammers. So apparently, Galarian Darumaka taking those berries is not something that Snover or its parent Abomasnow is okay with, so Abomasnow has to chase those little hooligans off. Pangoro's sword entry says this Pokemon is quick to anger, and it has no problem using its prodigious strength to get its way. It lives for duels against Obstagoon. This is another cool Pokemon species rivalry here, and it makes a lot of sense. Two big buff dark types not liking each other? That's pretty cool. Clink's shield entry says it's suspected that Clink were the inspiration behind ancient people's invention of the first gears. This is fascinating to me because it directly conflicts with some information about Clink that we got in a previous game. Back in Black and White, Professor Juniper says that Clink was first spotted 100 years ago in the Chargestone Cave. But if Clink only showed up 100 years ago, how could ancient people have been inspired to make gears from Clink? What came first, the gear or the Clink? The Pokemon research community appears not to know. Bronzor's shield entry says polishing Bronzor to a shine makes its surface reflect the truth, according to common lore. Be that as it may, Bronzor hates being polished. This is interesting to me because clearly Bronzor has some kind of instinct to not show people the truth. Maybe some bad things came about it in the past when people see the truth and that resulted in terrible things, so Bronzor is like, no, you can't polish me, you can't know the truth or whatever that is, because it could have terrible consequences. Dusknoir's shield entry says, with the mouth on its belly, Dusknoir swallows its target whole. The soul is the only thing eaten. Dusknoir disgorges the body before departing. Oh, God, that is messed up. It just swallows the whole thing, eats its soul, and then just spits out this soulless body that just leaves there. Like, my God, ghost Pokemon are messed up. Trubbish's shield entry says, this Pokemon was born from a bag stuffed with trash. Galarian Weezing relished the fumes belched by Trubbish. This is another fun Pokemon relationship dex entry. Seems Galarian Weezing likes hanging around Trubbish because it thinks its belches are tasty. Barraskewda's sword entry says, this Pokemon has a jaw that's as sharp as a spear and strong as steel. Apparently Barraskewda's flesh is surprisingly tasty too. Add Barraskewda to the list of Pokemon that I would probably eat. Cantonian Meowth's shield dex entry says, it washes its face regularly to keep the coin on its forehead spotless. It doesn't get along with Galarian Meowth. This is interesting to me because I just kind of assumed that regional variants of different kinds would get along because they're still the same species, but apparently Cantonian Meowth and Galarian Meowth don't like each other. Galarian Meowth's sword entry says, living with a savage seafaring people has toughened this Pokemon's body so much that parts of it have turned to iron. This is interesting for me because I hadn't heard about how Galarian Meowth came to be, and apparently it's because it lived with Vikings. Okay. Persian's shield entry says, its elegant and refined behavior clashes with that of the barbaric Berserker. The relationship between the two is one of mutual disdain. So Cantonian Meowth and Galarian Meowth's dislike of each other continues into their evolved form. Sylveon's shield entry says, there's a Galarian fairy tale that describes a beautiful Sylveon vanquishing a dreadful dragon Pokemon. I freaking love that. Instead of a knight defeating some evil dragon, they have the adorable fairy Pokemon defeat the dragon, which is of course appropriate. Appleton's shield entry says, its body is covered in sweet nectar, and the skin on its back is especially yummy. Children used to have it as a snack. Dear God, I hope that doesn't hurt. Just imagine this Appleton walking around and children just ripping pieces of your back off of you to eat. Like, my God, like I said, I hope that doesn't hurt and that it grows back because otherwise, poor Appleton. Meowstic's sword entry says, revealing the eye-like patterns on the inside of its eyes will unleash its psychic powers. It normally keeps the patterns hidden, however. Okay, so this is not new information. It actually mentions this in previous generation Meowstic Pokedex entries, but I wanted to include it because I had no idea, because I almost never see Meowstic anywhere. And have you seen the eye patterns? Like when it shows them? Let me just show you what that looks like. You see this? You see this crazy, disturbing eye stuff? Like, oh my God, these Pokemon are freaking terrifying. Aromatese's sword entry says, the scent that constantly emits from its fur is so powerful that this Pokemon's companions will eventually lose their sense of smell. So pro tip, don't spend that much time around an Aromatese because then you'll just never be able to smell anything again, which is, my gosh. Next up is Sirfetch'd, and I want to talk about both of its dex entries. Its sword entry says, only Farfetch'd that have survived many battles can attain this evolution. When this Pokemon's leek withers, it will retire from combat. So this is not new information. They mentioned that when Sirfetch'd was first revealed many months ago. However, I wanted to mention it because it sets up its shield dex entry. After deflecting attacks with its hard leaf shield, it strikes back with its sharp leek stalk. The leek stalk is both weapon and food. Wait, hold on. You're telling me that it values this leek so much that if it withers, it will just retire from combat, but at the same time, it also eats it? Why would you eat the thing that you're worried about withering? I feel like that would speed up the withering process. This doesn't make any sense. Toxicroak's shield entry says, it booms out a victory croak when its prey goes down in defeat. This Pokemon and Seismitoad are related species. I love that they mentioned this. It's a cool confirmation of Darwinian evolution occurring in the Pokemon world. Seismitoad and Toxicroak had a common ancestor and are closely related species, and this dex entry, totally confirms that, which is awesome. Golisopod's shield entry says they live in sunken ships or in holes in the seabed. When Golisopod and Grapploct battle, the loser becomes the winner's meal. That is metal as hell. Golisopod and Grapploct fighting to the death in a sunken ship, and the loser gets eaten by the winner? Holy crap. That is terrifying and also really cool. Grimmsnarl's sword entry says, with the hair wrapped around its body helping to enhance its muscles, this Pokemon can overwhelm even Machamp. And I don't think it's talking about just the fairy over fighting type advantage. I think it's meaning to say that the hair on Grimmsnarl's body makes it so physically strong that it's stronger than Machamp, which is wild. Maybe Machamp would be able to overwhelm Grimmsnarl if it didn't shave its entire body. Hatchrim's sword entry says, no matter who you are, if you bring strong emotions near this Pokemon, it will silence you violently. I'm gonna go ahead and just say it's probably not safe to have a Hatchrim around because whether you're really sad or really happy, this thing's gonna punch you in the face. Bisharp's shield entry says, violent conflicts erupt between Bisharp and Fracture over places where sharpening stones can be found. This is fascinating to me because both Bisharp and Fracture have dex entries that talk about how they sharpen parts of their bodies on sharpening stones. So it makes perfect sense that they would fight over areas with really good sharpening stones. I love that they're kind of looking back at past facts about Pokemon and then connecting them with new facts. That's awesome. Sock's shield entry says, the karate chops of a sock that's trained itself to the limit can cleave the ocean itself. Wait. You can cut the ocean? What does that even mean? It's a liquid. You can't cut a liquid. Your hand would slice through it, and yeah, it might create an air bubble, but then the water just comes back together. What are you talking about, Sock? This entry was written by a Sock. Galarian Weezing's shield entry says, long ago during a time when droves of factories fouled the air with pollution, Weezing changed into this form for some reason. I love this background lore because it makes so much sense. Galarian Weezing eats poisonous gases and then spews out non-poisonous gases. It purifies the air. I think it's so cool that humans had mucked up the air of Galar so terribly that a poison-type Pokemon evolved to help save the environment by purifying the air and ending up taking on the appearance of a factory in the process. Like, that is fascinating and super creative, and I like Galarian Weezing all the more because of this dex entry. Excelgor's sword entry says it moves with blinding speed and lobs poison at foes. Featuring Excelgor as a main character is a surefire way to make a movie or comic popular. I love that this dex entry just acknowledges that Excelgor looks like a superhero. That's fun. LGM's sword entry says, if this Pokemon stands near a TV, strange scenery will appear on the screen. That scenery is said to be from its home. That is wild to me. Like, why are people not studying this more? You just put LGM next to a TV and you get a live feed of an alien planet that sustains life? That's insane. Beheeyem's sword entry says, whenever a Beheeyem visits a farm, a Dubwool mysteriously disappears. That is freaking hilarious. Beheeyem just abducts sheep. That's so funny. Braviary's shield entry says, because this Pokemon is hot-headed and belligerent, it's Corviknight that's taken the role of transportation in Galar. I think that's a fun fact. They considered Braviary to be the flying taxi Pokemon instead of Corviknight, but they couldn't because it's a jerk. Scorpy's sword entry says, after burrowing into the sand, it waits patiently for prey to come near. This Pokemon and Sizzlipede share common descent. This is another really awesome dex entry like with Toxicroak and Seismitoad. It confirms common ancestry and Darwinian evolution in the Pokemon world. That is fascinating, and I love that they're confirming that. Drapion's shield entry says it's so vicious that it's called the Sand Demon. Yet when confronted by Hippowdon, Drapion keeps a low profile and will never pick a fight. So Drapion is this big, boisterous, vicious Pokemon, but it's terrified of Hippowdon. Which honestly fair, hippos are terrifying. Litwick's shield entry says, the younger the life this Pokemon absorbs, the brighter and eerier the flame on its head burns. Jesus Christ, I know that Pokemon dex entries have talked about child murder before, but still, this one just hits different to me. It's like this cute little candle just absorbing the life of a child. It makes the flame burn brighter, so it's more motivated to kill children than adults. Like, oh, that's, ugh. Malamar's shield entry says, it's said that Malamar's hypnotic powers played a role in certain history-changing events. I think that's really cool, honestly. Like, crazy historical events in the Pokemon world played out differently than they would have because of Malamar hypnotizing and mind controlling people. Like, that's kind of cool. Weavile's sword entry says they attack their quarry in packs. Prey as large as Mamoswine easily fall to the teamwork of a group of Weavile. That is dope. Weavile hunt in packs and take out mammoths? Like, holy crap, that is awesome. Marini's shield entry says, unlike their Alolan counterparts, the Marini of the Galar region have not yet figured out that the branches of Corsola are delicious. Oh, really? Oh, they haven't discovered that? Oh, well, why could that be? Well, maybe that's because all of the Corsola in the Galar region have ghost branches, which probably don't taste like anything. Hippowdon's sword entry says stones can get stuck in the ports on their bodies. Dwebble help dislodge such stones, so Hippowdon look after these Pokemon. I love this. The earlier dex entries about Dwebble talked about them living in Hippowdon ports, but it never said whether Hippowdon was okay with it. This dex entry confirms that Hippowdon and Dwebble have a symbiotic relationship. So Hippowdon's just wandering around the desert with cute little Dwebble living in its ports. That's fun, and I love it. Durant's shield entry says, with their large mandibles, these Pokemon can crunch their way through rock. They work together to protect their eggs from Sandaconda. This is a fun fact because we knew that Heatmore hunted Durant, but we didn't know that Sandaconda also hunts Durant's eggs, so that's interesting. Honege's sword entry says, Honege's soul once belonged to a person who was killed a long time ago by the sword that makes up Honedge's body. Okay, hold the F on. We have known for a while that Honedge is a sword that was possessed by some spirit. But it is never said before that specifically the spirit that possesses the sword is the person who was killed by the sword. That is horrifying. The Shield Dex entry for Aegislash-Blade form says that once upon a time, a king with an Aegislash reigned over the land. His Pokemon eventually drained him of life, and his Pokemon fell with him. I need more information about this story. Was the king cruel to the Aegislash and it finally got its revenge? Or did the Aegislash finally decide, no, I want the power, and then just killed its lifelong best friend? Like, I don't know. It's fascinating and terrifying, and just stay away from Aegislash. Clobopus's shield entry says its tentacles tear off easily, but it isn't alarmed when that happens. It knows they'll grow back. It's about as smart as a 3-year-old. That's just hilarious. It just confirms the intelligence of a Pokemon based on the intelligence of a child. That's just funny. Mantike's sword entry says, Mantike living in Galar seem to be somewhat sluggish. The colder waters of the seas in this region may be the cause. I think that's a fun fact. Mantike and Mantine potentially as well get slower in colder waters. What's interesting to me though is that Mantike also lives in Sinnoh, which is a cold climate as well, but it doesn't say anything about them being slower there too. Type Null's sword entry says, rumor has it that the theft of top secret research notes led to a new instance of this Pokemon being created in the Galar region. That is a really cool story. Of course, we know about Type Null being created by Ether back in the Alola region, but it explains Type Null being here in the Galar region by someone stealing the research from Ether and then traveling to Galar and creating it here. That's really cool. Sliggoo's shield entry says the lump on its back contains its tiny brain. It thinks only of food and escaping its enemies. So that's a fun little Pokemon anatomy lesson. The brain of a Sliggoo is in its little hump. Dreepy's sword entry says, after being reborn as a ghost Pokemon, Dreepy wanders the areas it used to inhabit when it was alive in prehistoric seas. That is freaking cool. So is Dreepy a fossil Pokemon, but instead of being revived in the typical way, it was revived in some spiritual way and it ended up as a ghost Pokemon instead of a Dragon Rock Pokemon? I don't know. That's so cool. Dragapult's shield entry says, apparently the Dreepy inside Dragapult's horns eagerly look forward to being launched out at Mach speeds. I love that. For a while I was thinking, man, that seems kind of cruel that Dragapult is just firing its children at its enemies, but apparently the Dreepy like it, so that's nice. The Shield Dex entry for Zacian's Hero of Many Battles forms says that this Pokemon has slumbered for many years. Some say it's Zamazenta's elder sister, others say the two Pokemon are rivals. I like this because while legendary Pokemon are technically genderless, this is giving them an associated gender, so Zacian is associated more with the feminine side of things. Although, I don't know whether Zamazenta is also supposed to be feminine, or if it's supposed to be more masculine in their counterparts. I don't know, I just think it's interesting. Now for some interesting Pokedex entries for Gigantamax forms. Gigantamax Orbeetle's shield entry says, if it were to utilize every last bit of its power, it could control the minds of every living being in its vicinity. That's terrifying. Stay away from a Gigantamax Orbeetle, or you will be mind controlled, like my goodness. Gigantamax Kingler's shield entry says, the bubbles it spews out are strongly alkaline. Any opponents hit by them will have their bodies quickly melted away. So apparently Gmax Foam Burst just kills things. Oh my god! Gigantamax Machamp's shield entry says, one of these Pokemon once used its immeasurable strength to lift a large ship that was in trouble. It then carried the ship to port. I love this Dex entry because a lot of the Gen 7 Mega Evolution Dex entries talk about how they're violent and vicious and just want to fight, and they're just almost seemingly evil creatures. But with Gigantamax Machamp, it rescued a ship. Just like this giant four-armed buff thing walking through the ocean water, picking up a ship and bringing it back to shore. Like, it's heroic. and I think that's awesome. Gigantamax Gengar's shield entry says it lays traps hoping to steal the lives of those it catches. If you stand in front of its mouth, you'll hear your loved one's voices calling out to you. That is hella disturbing. Is it the voices of passed on loved ones and they're calling to you from the terrible afterlife? Or are they ones that are currently still alive and it's tricking you into coming closer? I don't know, it's terrifying. Gigantamax Colossal's shield entry says, when Galar was hit by a harsh cold wave, this Pokemon served as a giant heating stove and saved many lives. This is another great one. It's another heroic Gigantamax story, which is awesome. I want to hear more about them and not just how they can destroy things. Gigantamax Meowth's sword entry says, the pattern that has appeared on its giant coin is thought to be the key to unlocking the secrets of the Dynamax phenomenon. If that's true, it's very straightforward because supposedly that pattern is just the Japanese kanji for large. So the secrets of Dynamax Pokemon is just that they get big. And finally, Gigantamax Lapras's sword entry says over 5,000 people can ride on its shell at once. And it's a very comfortable ride without the slightest shaking or swaying. It may seem like that would be a great business model for them to do some sort of cruise line with Gigantamax Lapras, but it can only stay Gigantamax for 3 turns, and that would be kind of bad if it went back to normal in the middle of the ocean. So there we have it. Those are the Dex entries from Pokemon Sword and Shield that I thought were the most interesting. If I missed any that you think I should have mentioned, let me know them down in the comments below. All right, that's all I have for now. So till next time, Poke fans. Gotta catch them all. Greetings, Poke fans. Michael here, and at the beginning of 2020, so 15 years ago, I made a video where I went over every single new Pokedex entry in Pokemon Sword and Shield that I thought was crazy. With crazy being a broad term covering things that I thought were disturbing or shocking or funny or interesting or some new information about an older gen Pokemon that we didn't have before. Today's video will be the exact same thing except for Dex entries in the Sword and Shield expansion pass, the Isle of Armor, and the Crown Tundra. Most of the Dex entries are for older generation Pokemon, but they are still new Dex entries. Starting with the Alola games, they stopped just rehashing the same couple Dex entries for older generation Pokemon. They started making new ones, and they continued that trend in Sword and Shield. So a lot of the Dex entries are completely brand new, even though the Pokemon are many generations old. This list will be in no particular order. I tried to go generally in Pokedex order, but I might have gotten things mixed up. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel and tap that bell for notifications, since less than half of my viewers are subscribable-dibbled. And let's dive in to every crazy Pokedex entry in the Sword and Shield expansion pass. We shall begin with Dex entries from the Isle of Armor Pokedex. Dunsparce's sword entry reads, this Pokemon's tiny wings have some scientists saying that Dunsparce used to fly through the sky in ancient times. I love that they acknowledge Dunsparce's wings in more of a way than just, oh, it can float a little. I think it's really cool to acknowledge that probably in ancient times, Dunsparce looked something more like those fake Dunsparce evolutions that are all over the internet. And if that's the case, wow, what a hell of a downgrade. Next up are Dex entries for Lickitung, and I think both its Sword and Shield entries are worthy of note. Lickitung's Sword entry reads, if this Pokemon's sticky saliva gets on you and you don't clean it off, an intense itch will set in. The itch won't go away either. Okay, I already thought Lickitung was a gross Pokemon, but now, if it licks you and you don't clean it off, you will itch in that spot forever. That's disgusting and horrifying. And also, how much time do you have? If you don't clean it off like, what, in a minute? In an hour? I don't like thinking about it. And then its Shield entry reads, bug Pokemon are Lickitung's main food source. This Pokemon paralyzes its prey with a lick from its long tongue, then swallows the prey whole. This is the first we learn of Lickitung actually eating bug Pokemon, and eating them whole for that matter, which is very gross. But also I kind of picture it trying to eat a Scolipede, trying to swallow that thing whole and that not going well. Venipede's sword entry reads, Venipede and Sizzlipede are similar species, but when the two meet, a huge fight ensues. I love it when Pokemon talks about taxonomy or evolutionary branches of the evolutionary tree. So the fact that they acknowledge that two Pokemon whose names end in the same thing are actually related is awesome. Fungus's sword entry reads, no one knows what the Pokeball-like pattern on Fungus means or why Fungus has it. This is hilarious. We know why it's there. It's because when making the Gen 5 games, Black and White, and no old Pokemon were there, they decided, oh, we still want to have a fake item Pokemon. So they made mushrooms with Pokeballs on the top of their heads. But in the Pokemon universe, this acknowledges how deeply illogical it is, because why would these mushrooms mimic metal, man-made devices? It's ridiculous. Magnemite's sword entry reads, at times, Magnemite runs out of electricity and ends up on the ground. If you give batteries to a grounded Magnemite, it'll start moving again. I think this is so cute. Like, if a little Magnemite is tired, just like, get out some batteries. Like, here you go, little guy. It's gonna be okay. And then he'll be okay. Like, how funny is that? Herdior's sword entry reads, Herdior is a very smart and friendly Pokemon. So much so that there's a theory that Herdior was the first Pokemon to partner with people. I love how this is kind of a nod to dogs being domesticated in ancient times from wolves. So Herdior is a domestic dog Pokemon and is known for working with people, and so it makes sense that it might have been one of the first ones. Maybe Herdior wasn't just deciding to work with people, it was originally some wild wolf Pokemon and ancient Pokemon people domesticated it. I wanted to note that this isn't the first time we've learned about Herdior being one of the very first creatures to work with people. Its Ultra Moon entry reads, it has been living with people for so long that portrayals of it can be found on the walls of caves from long, long ago. I just really want to see some official Pokemon cave paintings. That would be awesome. Next up are Scizor's dex entries, and I'm gonna cover both of them. Its sword entry reads, bulky pincers account for 1/3 of Scizor's body weight. A single swing of one of these pincers will crush a boulder completely. I'm amused by this because it informs us of the precise weight of Scizor's pincers. It weighs 260.1 pounds, which means its pincers together weigh 86.7 pounds, which that's like having a 45-pound weight plate on each hand, approximately. I'd be impressed if you could crush a boulder with it, but actually, considering the next entry, it being able to crush a boulder kind of makes sense. Its shield entry reads, though its body is slim, Scizor has tremendous attacking power. Even Scizor's muscles are made of metal. How is this possible? No idea. Is it extremely cool sounding? Yes. Palisand's sword entry reads, Palisand is known as the beach nightmare. It pulls its prey down into the sand by controlling the sand itself, and then it sucks out their souls. Lots of ghost Pokemon are disturbing, of course, and Palisand is no exception. Plenty of its previous dex entries talk about how it sucks out the vitality of its targets. However, to me, there's a difference between sucking out the vitality, basically just killing things, and then sucking out their souls. This seems to say that rather than just killing its targets, it turns them into soulless husks. Also, it's called the Beach Nightmare. Exploud's sword entry reads, in the past, people would use the loud voices of these Pokemon as a means of communication between distant cities. This is amazing. Okay, Exploud, tell him that we need the bread and milk delivered by next Thursday, or else our entire village is going to starve. Okay? You got that? Great, now tell him. Explode, explode, explode! Great, thanks for doing that. I'm sure they understood that and will be totally fine. Skarmory's sword entry reads, the pointed feathers of these Pokemon are sharper than swords. Skarmory and Corviknight fight viciously over territory. I really like it when they acknowledge that they have two Pokemon that are of sort of similar designs, and so they just make them enemies. It's fantastic. I also wanted to mention Skarmory's shield entry, which says people fashion swords from Skarmory's shed feathers. So this Pokemon is a popular element in heraldic designs. I had to look it up, so there's probably a good chance that you didn't know either, but heraldic basically means coats of arms, you know, those fancy symbols that a lot of families or sports teams in Europe use. So I just think that's really interesting that Skarmory is often featured in those in the Pokemon world because they use its fallen feathers for swords. Could you imagine that? There's just a bird, and when it sheds a feather, it's a sword? Mienshau's sword entry reads, when Mienshao comes across a truly challenging opponent, it will lighten itself by biting off the fur on its arms. I know it's just hair. It's not like biting off its own arm or something crazy like that, but still, this seems really intense and kind of metal to me. Volcarona's sword entry reads, Volcarona scatters burning scales. Some say it does this to start fires. Others say it's trying to rescue those that suffer in the cold. I like this entry because it kind of acknowledges some inconsistencies in Volcarona's other Dex entries. A lot of them talk about how when a volcanic eruption darkened the atmosphere in ancient times, it served as the replacement sun. And then some other ones mention that it scatters its embers to help keep suffering small Pokemon warm in the cold. But then its Ultra Sun Dex entry says that ancient people feared it and called it the Rage of the Sun. So this new Dex entry basically says that that debate is still going on today. Some are saying it's a kind-hearted and altruistic Pokemon, but then others are saying that it's freaking dangerous and is harming everything. So I think it's interesting that this Pokemon is controversial. Seadra's sword entry reads, it's the males that raise the offspring. While Seadra are raising young, the spines on their backs secrete thicker and stronger poison. When I first read this, I was like, oh my God, they did the seahorse thing on the seahorse Pokemon. Turns out this isn't new information because it was mentioned once before, all the way back in its Crystal Dex entry. But I still wanted to bring it up because I feel like most of you were not aware of this, and also the fact that its poison gets more intense when it's raising its young is new information, so I can still cover it. Kingdra's sword entry reads, with the arrival of a storm at sea, this Pokemon will show itself on the surface. When a Kingdra and a Dragonite meet, a fierce battle ensues. I love this because it's giving me a really badass mental image of a Kingdra and a Dragonite dueling in the middle of an intense storm at sea. Like, that's awesome. Also, it could be referencing the fact that prior to Gen 3, these were the only two fully evolved dragon types. Or maybe it's a reference to Claire and Lance. Petalil's sword entry reads, Petalil appears around sources of clean water. Boiling leaves from this Pokemon's head results in a liquid that's sometimes used as a bug repellent. This is a lot. Okay, first off, boiling the leaves from its head, I certainly hope it doesn't hurt when you remove them. And also, it becomes a bug repellent? But only by boiling the leaves? Maybe that explains why Petalil is still weak to bug? Then finally for the Isle of Armor is Galarian Slowking's sword entry, which says a combination of toxins and the shock of evolving has increased Shelder's intelligence to the point that Shelder now controls Slowking. So Galarian Slowking is a zombie. With original Slowking, the Shelder's toxins just made the Slowking more intelligent. This time, the toxins combined with the spices made the Shelder more intelligent, so intelligent that it's now mind controlling the Slowking, which is kind of why it kind of walks wobbly like it does. That to me that just freaks me the hell out. So those are all the Isle of Armor Dex entries I wanted to cover, but now we can move on to the Crown Tundra. First, we'll cover Jinx's Dex entries, both of them. Jinx's sword entry reads, in certain parts of Galar, Jinx was once feared and worshipped as the Queen of Ice. Then its shield entry reads, the Jinx of Galar often have beautiful and delicate voices. Some of these Pokemon have even gathered a fan base. In our world, Jinx is a very unpopular Pokemon. But in Galar, the opposite is true, which is really weird. Magmar's sword entry reads, Magmar dispatches its prey with fire, but it regrets this habit once it realizes that it has burned its intended prey to a charred crisp. I find this dex entry, despite being pretty intense and a little gruesome, also very funny. Magmar's just overdoing it a lot. I also wanted to mention its shield entry, which says these Pokemon's bodies are constantly burning. Magmar are feared as one of the causes behind fires. Oh really? People of the Galar region, this Pokemon that's constantly on fire is feared as a cause of fires? Who could have predicted? Cryogonal's sword entry reads, with its icy chains, Cryogonal freezes those it encounters. It then takes its victims away to somewhere unknown. What is it with ice-type Pokemon that float doing evil kidnapping, freezing type stuff? Like Cryogonal does it, Frostlass does it. There's probably some other ones too. I also wanted to mention its shield entry. When the weather gets hot, these Pokemon turn into water vapor. Cryogonal are almost never seen during the summer. So this is not actually new information. I thought it was, but a lot of other previous dex entries mentioned that it turns into water vapor when it gets hot. But I still wanted to bring it up because holy crap, Cryogonal turns into water vapor when it gets warm? How does it stay alive? Swablu's shield entry reads, since Swablu look like a cumulus cloud, foes can have a hard time finding it. Apparently its wings turned white over many generations. So Swablu's wings were not always white. And I'm just wondering, what color were they before? Were they gray, like storm clouds? Or were they just something random, like purple? Nidorina's sword entry reads, the horn on its head has atrophied. It's thought that this happens so Nidorina's children won't get poked while their mother is feeding them. This is a reference to some of Nidorina's previous dex entries where it talks about how it chews up its food and then spits them out for its offspring, like lots of animals do. So this is kind of cool because it explains why it doesn't have a horn. It's so that when it leans down to spit the food back out, its eager offspring won't run up and get poked by the horn that's like right there. Nidoqueen's shield entry reads, it pacifies offspring by placing them in the gaps between the spines on its back. The spines will never secrete poison while young are present. I just think that's a really cool evolutionary feature, that Nidoqueen like stops secreting poison around its young, and Nidorina doesn't have a horn because of its young. Yet, neither of these Pokemon can breed. Nidorino's sword entry reads, with a horn that's harder than diamond, this Pokemon goes around shattering boulders as it searches for a moonstone. So we've known its horn was harder than diamond, but this is the first we learn of Nidorino actively seeking out a moonstone so it can evolve. That means Nidorino inherently know that they evolve via moonstones, and they are eager to do so. I just think that's really interesting, and it's one of the very few mentions in the Pokemon world of Pokemon actively seeking out methods of evolving, at least with stones. Nidoking's sword entry reads, when it goes on a rampage, it's impossible to control. But in the presence of a Nidoqueen it's lived with for a long time, Nidoking calms down. I just picture the Nidoqueen going like, honey, you need a Snickers. Tyrant's shield entry reads, this Pokemon is selfish and likes to be pampered. It can also inflict grievous wounds on its trainer just by playing around. So today's lesson is don't have a Tyrant. Not only can they inadvertently seriously harm you, they're also jerks. Salamence's sword entry reads, Salamence is an unusual Pokemon in that it was able to evolve a body with wings just by constantly wishing to be able to fly. So this is funny to me. It's not new information. A lot of previous Salamence entries talk about how its fervent wish to fly caused its DNA to mutate. But the wording of this, it was able to evolve a body with wings just by constantly wishing to be able to fly. Just makes it sound like, I wish, haha! Gabite's sword entry reads, this Pokemon emits ultrasonic waves from a protrusion on either side of its head to probe pitch dark caves. So Gabite uses echolocation, except instead of just barking, it's like just emitting waves from its head nubbins. Garchomp's sword entry reads, Garchomp makes its home in volcanic mountains. It flies through the sky as fast as a jet airplane, hunting down as much prey as it can. Then its shield entry reads, Garchomp is fast both underground and above. It can bring down prey and return to its den before its body has chilled from being outside. Did you catch the two relevant parts of those dex entries? It lives near volcanic mountains, and its body can chill from being outside. This is the first dex entry acknowledgement of Garchomp really hating ice. Ammonite's sword entry reads, because some Ammonite manage to escape after being restored or are released into the wild by people, this species is becoming a problem. I was thinking about this when I was playing through the Crown Tundra and seeing wild fossil Pokemon, something that I cannot recall seeing ever at any point in Pokemon. So I was thinking, oh, maybe enough time has passed and they've revived enough of these from fossils that they've gone back into the wild and become functional wild species again. Apparently, I was right, and with Ammonite, I was so right that Ammonite has come back so much that now it's an invasive species. Next are Kabuto's dex entries, and I'm bringing them up because they kind of contradict each other. Its sword entry reads, this species is almost entirely extinct. Kabuto molt every 3 days, making their shells harder and harder. And then its shield entry reads, while some say this species has gone extinct, Kabuto sightings are apparently fairly common in some places. It sounds like the sword entry made a statement and the shield entry is like, actually, the evolution of Kabutops also has a dex entry contradiction issue. But instead of it being sword and shield contradicting, it's one of the Gen 8 dex entries contradicting with an older gen. Kabutops' shield entry reads, the cause behind the extinction of this species is unknown. Kabutops were aggressive Pokemon that inhabited warm seas. This is in direct contradiction with its Ultra Sun dex entry. Its body had begun to change so it could function on land, but it didn't adapt in time and went extinct. Ultra Sun says, oh hey, we know the reason why it went extinct. And then Shield is like, no, we don't know. So like, do we know or do we not know? Aerodactyl's sword entry reads, this is a ferocious Pokemon from ancient times. Apparently, even modern technology is incapable of producing a perfectly restored specimen. At first, I was like, oh my gosh, this, like, any Aerodactyl we've seen is not perfectly restored. But then I realized, I think this is talking about its Mega Evolution. Mega Aerodactyl's Sun entry says part of its body has become stone. Some scholars claim that this is Aerodactyl's true appearance. Then its Ultra Moon dex entry for Mega Aerodactyl says Mega Evolution awakened some dormant genes, bringing back the sharp rocks that once covered Aerodactyl's entire body. So a regular restoration of Aerodactyl just makes what we know as Aerodactyl. The extra step of Mega Evolution is required for us to see its true appearance. Golbat's sword entry reads, it loves to drink other creatures' blood. It's said that if it finds others of its kind going hungry, it sometimes shares the blood it's gathered. Aww, look at Golbat being so friendly and sharing the blood it violently sucked from other creatures. Just how nice. But Golbat ain't getting any blood from a Beldum. Beldum's shield entry reads, the cells in this Pokemon's body are composed of magnetic material. Instead of blood, magnetic forces flow through Beldum's body. I love these random anatomy tidbits that make no sense. It's got magnetic forces instead of blood. Forces aren't like visible. That's not a one-to-one replacement. One is a liquid, one is a force. Metagross's sword entry reads, because the magnetic powers of these Pokemon get stronger in freezing temperatures, Metagross living on snowy mountains are full of energy. So a lot of pseudo-legendary Pokemon hate the cold, like Garchomp and Salamence and Dragonite, but Metagross, he digs it. Tortuga's shield entry reads, Tortuga is considered to be the ancestor of many turtle Pokemon. It was restored to life from a fossil. The amount of Pokemon theories and Darwinian evolution discussions that I've seen over the years talking about how Tortuga is an ancestor of Lapras and Squirtle and other turtle Pokemon, I've seen a lot. And so I love that this Pokedex entry finally acknowledges and confirms that. Arcan's sword entry reads, this Pokemon was successfully restored from a fossil. As research suggested, Arcan is unable to fly, but it's very good at jumping. I love that they say this. Somebody passed one, it's like, oh yeah, Arcan, yeah, he can't fly. Yeah, he sucks. But then this one is like, I mean, he can't fly, but he can jump really well. So, good for him. Archeops' sword entry reads, it needs a running start to take off. If Archeops wants to fly, it first needs to run nearly 25 miles per hour, building speed over a course of about 2.5 miles. Most airplane runways are 6,000 feet, which is a bit over 1 mile. So Archeops needs like 2.5 times an airplane runway to take off? My God! Cradilly's sword entry reads, it has short legs and can't walk very fast, but its neck and tentacles can extend to over 3 times their usual length to nab distant prey. Its neck and its tentacles. Do you realize how much of a reach that is? That is, my God, it could be on the other side of a building and catch you. Whoa. Aggron's shield entry reads, long ago there was a king who wore a helmet meant to resemble the head of an Aggron. He was trying to channel the Pokemon's strength. I just think this is a really cool piece of Pokemon universe history. And also that helmet sounds awesome. Dragonite's shield entry reads, this Pokemon is known as the Sea Incarnate. Figureheads that resemble Dragonite decorate the bows of many ships. So in the Pokemon world, instead of mermaids on the front of ships, you got Dragonites. Registeel's sword entry reads, Registeel's body is made of a strange material that is flexible enough to stretch and shrink, but also more durable than any metal. So not only did we learn that Cradilly can stretch its body to ridiculous lengths, so can Registeel, which I've never seen it do that. That's wild. Regielecki's shield entry reads, its entire body is made up of a single organ that generates electrical energy. Regielecki is capable of creating all of Galar's electricity. Chairman Rose tried to do all that crazy nonsense with the Darkest Day when he could have just taken a train to the south and got a Regielecki. Regidrago's sword entry reads, an academic theory proposes that Regidrago's arms were once the head of an ancient dragon Pokemon. The theory remains unproven. If it's unproven, why is it in the Pokedex? I love how the Pokedex is just like, oh yeah, here's this really interesting fun fact about this Pokemon. That's not verified or real in any way. Come on, Pokedex, improve your journalistic integrity. The next few dex entries are all about the Galarian legendary birds, and they kind of inform us that maybe they're not the legendary birds. Galarian Articuno's shield entry reads, known as Articuno, this Pokemon fires beams that can immobilize opponents as if they had been frozen solid. Galarian Zapdos' sword entry reads, when its feathers rub together, they produce a crackling sound like the zapping of electricity. That's why this Pokemon is called Zapdos. Then Galarian Moltres' shield entry reads, the sinister aura that blazes like molten fire around this Pokemon is what inspired the name Moltres. Known as Articuno, is called Zapdos, inspired the name Moltres. These dex entries seem to imply that the legendary Galarian birds are not just variants of the original legendary birds. They're totally separate Pokemon that just bear a resemblance to the Kanto legendary birds. So the people of the region just, oh hey, that looks kind of like Zapdos, that must be Zapdos, and the Pokedex classifies them as such. but the reality seems to be that they're totally different Pokemon. Spectrier's sword entry reads, it probes its surroundings with all its senses save one. It doesn't use its sense of sight. Spectrier's kicks are said to separate soul from body. I just wanted to mention this because I think it's kind of amusing. It makes me picture the scene from Doctor Strange where they like punch him in the stomach and like, oh, suddenly I'm astral projecting. And I just picture Spectrier just going around doing that. Ice Rider Calyrex's sword entry reads, according to lore, this Pokemon showed no mercy to those who got in its way, yet it would heal its opponent's wounds after battle. What an interesting character Calyrex is. It brutally defeats anyone who gets in its way, but it's kind to them afterward. It's kind of honorable and kind of weird. Then finally, Shadow Rider Calyrex's shield entry says, legend says that by using its power to see all events from past to future, this Pokemon saved the creatures of a forest from a meteorite strike. Is it just Shadow Rider Calyrex that can see all events from past to future? Because regular Calyrex couldn't remember anything. But this one could see the future and stopped a meteorite strike. Like, what an upgrade just by hopping on a horse. All right, that's all I have for now. So till next time, Pokefans. Gotta catch them all. Greetings, Pokefans. Michael here, and Pokemon Legends Arceus, Arceus, has what I believe to be the most interesting Pokedex in Pokemon history. That's because it was written in the past by Professor Laventon, who is being exposed to and learning about these Pokemon genuinely for the first time, as opposed to modern day Pokedexes, where we've theoretically known a lot more about Pokemon for a lot longer. I wanted to dive deep into this new old Pokedex, so I read through every single dex entry and compiled a list of those that I thought were the most worthy of note, due to being crazy or disturbing or funny or new information about old Pokemon or something else. Also, in case it's not obvious, this video will include spoilers for new Pokemon and new forms. So if you don't want to see those, then I'm not entirely sure why you clicked on the video. Hisuian Decidueye's dex entry says the air stored inside the rachis of Decidueye's feathers insulates the Pokemon against Hisui's extreme cold. This is firm proof that evolution can be influenced by environment. This dex entry simply explains why Hisuian Decidueye exists. It adapted to the harsh cold of the Hisui/Sinnoh region. Hisuian Typhlosion's entry reads, said to purify lost forsaken souls with its flames and guide them to the afterlife. I believe its form has been influenced by the energy of the sacred mountain towering at Hisui's center. So instead of adapting to the cold like Decidueye, Typhlosion adapted to the magic of the mountain? Oshawott entry says this Pokemon from the Unova region uses the shell on its belly as a weapon to cut down its foes. Thus, I've conferred upon this shell the name Scalchop. We've known forever that Oshawott's shell is called the Scalchop, but we didn't know that Professor Laventon was the one to name it that. Hisuian Samurot's entry says, Heart of Heart and Deft of Blade, this rare form of Samurott is a product of the Pokemon's evolution in the region of Hisui. Its turbulent blows crash into foes like ceaseless pounding waves. I thought this one was worthy of note because Decidueye and Typhlosion got explanations for why their forms exist, and Samurott did not. It just says this is what happens when it evolves in Hisui, so I don't really know why it was counted out here. Bidoof's entry says, Bidoof has an unsophisticated face and is rarely flustered by anything. There have been incidents involving Bidoof sauntering into villages and gnawing on the houses without a single care. This game is the first time Bidoof has been labeled as a pest, which is so rude. How dare they slander our lord? Babarrel's entry says, Babarrel's fur repels water and is also a fantastic material for heat retention. These Pokemon create dams on rivers to live in. We knew about the dams, but the first sentence sticks out to me. It repels water, which kind of makes sense, but the line about heat retention is interesting. Are they saying that because that's how Babarrel does well in the relatively cold climate of Hisui? Or are they saying that because people are making clothes out of it? Staravia's entry says they form remarkably large flocks and are constantly fighting amongst themselves. I suspect that those with magnificent plumes on their heads are the strong ones. We know about the flocks and the fighting amongst themselves, but the theory that the larger plumes is the stronger Staravia, I think is interesting, because when it becomes a Staraptor, its plume becomes a whole emo hair thing. So the longer it is, more likely to evolve, maybe. Luxio's entry says, proudly uses its electrified claws as weapons. It seems to be a gracious Pokemon, evenly sharing the spoils of the hunt with others of its kind. This is the first time we've learned that Luxio is a team player. Luxray's entry says they form packs, each having one male as leader. Legends say that when Luxray's two eyes shimmer with gold, the Pokemon can see through anything. The first part is interesting because this is the first time we've learned that Luxray don't just live in packs, but they live in packs with the same organizational patriarchal structure as lions. So that's really cool. But the second part is also interesting because it says legends say, which means that Professor Laventon doesn't know for certain that Luxray has X-ray vision, which we do know that in modern Pokemon games, but it also means that someone figured that out before Professor Laventon, and it somehow became a legend. Beautifly's entry says, a colorful and incredibly beautiful, but also greedy Pokemon. In an effort to keep its favorite food all to itself, it will chase away Combee as they try to gather nectar. We've known for a while that Beautifly is a jerk, but we didn't previously know that Beautifly would harass and steal from Combee specifically. Cascoon's entry says, the silk coating its body is thin but sufficiently strong. Cascoon's silk has a luster and texture superior to that of Silcoon's, and clothes made using Cascoon silk are regarded as top-notch. This is the first mention of Cascoon having higher quality silk than Silcoon, which surprises me. Silcoon has silk in its name and is not the one who ends up becoming a poison type. It's also the first time we hear of Cascoon silk being used to make clothing. Top-notch clothing at that. Drifblim's entry says, it drifts along at dusk, perfectly silent. Its transient, melancholy aspect touches some people deeply. Every so often, one will come upon a song or poem devoted to Drifblim. I think this is hilarious. I love how in previous generations Dex entries it talks about how Drifblim carries people off to the afterlife and how the gas inside its body is actually souls. But then here, it's like, aw, he looks so melancholy and quiet. I'm gonna write a song. Weasel's entry says it moves freely in the water by spinning its forked tail for propulsion. The resemblance to the screw of a steamboat is coincidental. Obviously, we know that Weasel's design was partially based on the screw of a boat. However, in universe, it's kind of interesting to see Professor Laventon go, oh yeah, these things are similar, but it's just a coincidence. Floatzel's entry says, has a long, rather splendid flotation sac, which prevents Floatzel from drowning even in stormy seas. One might glimpse this species around fishing hamlets from time to time. I'm including this entry solely for the fact that I think it's funny that Laventon calls its flotation sac rather splendid. The next entries are those for Burmy and Wormadam. All 6 of them. This is the first time that we've gotten unique Dex entries for every single one of their forms, and it provides some interesting insight into the differences between each of them. If its cloak is even slightly damaged, Burmy will immediately repair it with whatever is close at hand. The Pokemon within the cloak is scrawny and vulnerable to the cold. It creates a cloak by weaving together sand, mud, and silk it has spat out. This earthen cloak is ruined by wind and rain, so the Pokemon hides away in caves and other such places. When confronted by a lack of other materials, Burmy will create its cloak using dust and refuse. The cloak seems to be more comfortable than one would think. The cloak, fashioned from plant matter, has merged with the Pokemon and is now part of the body, like fur or skin. I suspect this fusion is an effect of the energy evolved in evolution. Its earthen skin is reasonably hard. It has no problem repelling a Starly's pecking, at least. Its body, composed of refuse, blends into the scenery so much as to be inconspicuous. This seems to be the perfect way for the Pokemon to evade the detection of predators. There's a lot of fun tidbits in there, like Burmy's sand cloak, not just being the result of being around sand and dirt, but also because it moves to caves to keep that cloak from getting destroyed. And how the trash cloak is more comfortable, and how Wormadam's trash cloak is the best camouflage, which is not what you'd expect, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because most predators aren't gonna be trying to eat trash. Unless it's a raccoon. Golem's entry says the rock-like shell is shed each year. The cast-off shell then crumbles, reverting to a mass of soil, which can be spread across fields to promote crop growth. We've known for a while that Golem sheds its shell, but we didn't know that the shell became very fertile soil. So, guess it makes sense to keep a Golem around so when it sheds its shell, you can make plants grow well. Oh, I kind of rhymed there, that was fun. Weird Ear's entry says, the black orbs shine with an uncanny light when the Pokemon is erecting invisible barriers. The fur shed from its beard retains heat well and is a highly useful material for winter clothing. Obviously, Weird Ear is a new Pokemon, so any information about it is going to be new. However, I'm not gonna cover every single new Pokemon's entry, only if it's something that I think stands out, like Weird Ear's beard hair being used to make very nice winter clothing. Munchlax's entry says its robust stomach allows it to nonchalantly devour even rotted matter. It pays frequent visits to villages, seeking out food scraps intended for compost. This is kind of like the Bidoof entry, another tidbit into the past about how Munchlax would wander into villages and eat out of their trash cans. So it's like a raccoon. Snorlax's entry says, this glutton appears in villages without warning and devours the entirety of their rice granaries. Such occurrences have long been counted among the gravest of disasters. That's horrifying. We've known for a while that Pokemon can harm people. That's kind of the central premise of this game. But even in previous generations, we knew that. Like, talk about how Gyarados can just burn a village to the ground, and how I feel like Gyarados was probably the Pokemon that destroyed Commander Comodo's village and killed a bunch of people before the events of Legends Arceus. But all of those are situations of Pokemon directly attacking people and structures. But this Snorlax situation is different. And it's also not how Snorlax has been portrayed in the past. Lots of its previous Dex entries just talk about how hungry it is, and how it sleeps a lot, and how it's docile. They literally talk about children playing on its belly. But this reveals that, at least in the past, Snorlax would starve entire villages of people by eating all of their food. I don't know about you, but I find it deeply unsettling that this Pokemon harmed people not just by attacking them, but by creating a famine. And yes, an argument could be made that maybe this is better because it's not directly killing people, and so they have time to recover and find other food sources. But the fact that the Dex entry says that this is counted among the gravest of disasters means that the people that this happened to probably didn't recover. And instead of just dying quickly to a hyper beam, they had a long, slow death by starvation. Oh my God. Raichu's entry says it can discharge bursts of electricity exceeding 100,000 volts. A single strike with that amount of power would incapacitate one of the Caparaja of my homeland. Two things about this. The first is that this is taking the Fire Red Dex entry and replacing Indian Elephant with Caparaja, which I guess makes sense. It was weird that they talked about real animals in the first place. And secondly, this entry basically confirms that Professor Laventon is from Galar, because Galar is the only place we are currently aware of where you can find a Caparaja. Actually, my editor Katie just sent this to me right after I finished recording, and Caparaja's sword entry says they came over from another region long ago. So maybe Laventon isn't from Galar, and it's from wherever Caparaja is originally from. Chimchar's entry says, full of vigor and always in high spirits. It was once known by the name Lantern Tail and feared as some kind of apparition. I think it's funny how people in the past are so dumb. They thought this tiny little monkey was a ghost. Monferno's entry reads, the deeper the blue on its face, the more powerful it will grow to become. It leaps about every which way and lands powerful blows against its opponents with the flame on its tail. This is interesting to me because it seems to be in direct opposition to a previous Dex entry. Monferno's Heart Gold Soul Silver entry says that the brighter blue on its face, the higher rank in the pack it is. The deeper blue, the more powerful it will become. The brighter blue, the higher rank in the pack. So either it's contradictory, or the brighter blue are the more powerful as Monferno, but then end up less likely to evolve. And the deeper blue ones end up in Fernape and then are stronger than everything else and go out on their own. I don't know. Baneri's entry says, my hypothesis as to why Baneri rolls up its ears is that its hearing is far too keen. I surmise that the Pokemon protects its hearing by limiting the sound that may enter its ears. This is interesting because it's just a hypothesis. Professor Laventon is theorizing why Baneri rolls up its ears. And either this is a new observation other Dex entries never made, or he's just wrong. Other Dex entries talk about how it keeps its ears rolled up when it's scared, as basically a defense mechanism. Because when it unrolls its ears, it's powerful enough to shatter boulders. Okay, so I wanted to bring up this entry because according to the knowledge that we supposedly have in modern days, Professor Laventon is wrong. Baneri doesn't keep its ears rolled up to limit its hearing, it keeps them rolled up so that if it gets attacked, it can fight back. Cherubi's entry says, once the fruit growing alongside the main body is large and plump, Cherubi will use the nutrients within to evolve. The fruit then detaches, becoming nourishment for other creatures. A lot of Cherubi's previous entries talk about how the small fruit stores the energy needed for evolution, but none of them talk about the fruit falling off and then being eaten by other Pokemon. Psyduck's entry says, suffers perpetual headaches. If the agony grows too great, Psyduck's latent power erupts, contrary to Psyduck's intent. Ergo, I am exploring ways to ease the pain. I just think this is cute. Professor Laventon learns about Psyduck's headaches and then immediately is like, I want to figure out a way to help them. Vespiquen's entry says, commands its subjects to build its hive. It will dispatch any interlopers who dare sneak into its nest and use them as nourishment for itself. Ooh, this is the first time we hear about Vespiquen eating Pokemon that invade its hive, which is like not that surprising, but this is the first time we've heard about it. Cleavor's entry says, a violent creature that fells towering trees with its crude axes and shields itself with hard stone. If one should chance upon this Pokemon in the wilds, one's only recourse is to flee. I just thought this was fun and ominous. And also incorrect. I dealt with a Cleavor by throwing bags of dust at it. Apom's entry says, this treetop dweller possesses a tail as dexterous as a hand. Ancient writings describe this Pokemon as a one-armed oddity. This is interesting because while other Dex entries have talked about how its tail is more useful than its arms, how its arms get clumsy because it rarely uses them, it's the first time we hear about ancient people, not like 200 years ago Jubilife Village people, ancient people actually thinking Apom only had one arm. Ambipom's entry says, to affirm their kinship, members of this species will form a ring by linking their newly doubled tails together. On rare occasions, humans have been accepted into such rings. We've known about Ambipom's hand-holding friendship circles for a while, but we didn't know that people could be in them, which doesn't that sound nice? Just holding hands with Pokemon singing Kumbaya? Gastrodon's West Sea form entry says, it eats beach sand for nourishment. Should one Gastrodon encounter another of a different color, a fierce battle will inevitably ensue. First off, we didn't know Gastrodon had some prejudices, but also this entry directly conflicts with another entry. It says that Gastrodon eat beach sand, but then its moon entry says that it eats plankton. So like, which one is it? Is it both? Does it differ on the region? I don't know. Overquill's entry says, its lance-like spikes and savage temperament have earned it the nickname Sea Fiend. It slurps up poison to nourish itself. I wanted to talk about this one to first acknowledge that Overquill is one of my favorite Pokemon names they've ever come up with, but also because I don't understand the logistics. Like, it creates poison, but then also eats poison. So can it eat the poison that it creates? Or is this like a Natsu situation where he can't eat his own fire? I don't know. Happini's entry says, in imitation of Chansey, it keeps a round stone tucked into its belly pouch and cherishes it dearly. It gets along with children and will sometimes play house with them for fun. I just thought that was cute. Roselia's entry says, though beautiful, it has highly poisonous thorns. There's an old tradition in my homeland wherein one would send these thorns to an opponent to challenge them to a duel. First off, we should acknowledge that dueling is one of the stupidest things mankind has come up with. Like, oh, we had an argument, let's shoot each other. And apparently they did it in Galar and challenged each other
by mailing Roselia thorns to each other, which is so odd but kind of badass. Hisuian Lilligant's Dex entry says, I suspect that its well-developed legs are the result of a life spent on mountains covered in deep snow. The scent it exudes from its flower crown heartens those in proximity. Well, he does say suspect, so we don't know 100% for certain. This is Hisuian Lilligant's only Dex entry, so we're gonna go with it. I thought it was interesting that this Lilligant would choose to live in snowy mountains. Like, it's a grass fighting type. It has no ice aspect to it, like Abomasnow does. So the fact that it lives in snow, despite being weak to ice, is kind of like, wow, this thing's hardcore. Gardevoir's entry says, it will dedicate itself to defending a master it has come to adore. Its pure white dress, reminiscent of those worn by ladies of nobility, is the dress of one who is willing to risk their life. Couple of things, we've known that Gardevoir's a Pokemon that'll risk its life for its master, but I just think the wording of this, the dress it wears is a dress of one willing to risk its life, is kind of over the top and kind of funny. But also the fact that it calls it a dress is interesting. It doesn't just call it a part of its body. So that's a bit unusual. And also apparently the ladies of nobility, either in Galar, Laventon's homeland, or if there are any ladies of nobility in the Hisui region, I haven't seen any. Well, regardless of where they are, they wear white dresses. Like they're all getting married at once. Yanma's entry says, its frail wings are so thin that one can see clear through them. However, during flight, these wings exhibit the power to churn air with a force enough to launch a house skyward. Holy crap, Yanma. Other Dex entries talked about how it could shatter glass, but lift a house? Are the Hisuian Yanma just extra shredded? Pachirisu's entry says, a species related to the Pikachu line. Though Pachirisu is a calm Pokemon, it still presents a danger should one touch its electrified tail or cheeks. This is the first instance of a Dex entry directly acknowledging that a Pikachu clone is a Pikachu clone. Stunky's entry says, the poison that gushes from its aft end is accompanied by an utterly evil-smelling odor with such potency that one whiff can induce memory loss. Other Stunky entries have talked about how it has other effects like causing you to faint, but causing you to just have memory loss is like, that might be even scarier. Skunktank's entry says, sprays a poisonous fluid to take down prey. Sometimes, unable to stomach the stench of its own fluid, it leaves the bested prey uneaten. This is amazing. Skunktank smells so bad that it itself will sometimes be like, oh, might have overdone it a bit. I'm not hungry anymore. Teddiursa's entry says it licks its paws because of the sweet honey that has soaked into them. It is cunning, stealing into the nests of comb bee and taking for itself the honey that the comb bee have amassed. We've known for a while that Teddiursa is obsessed with honey, but this is the first time it explicitly mentions that it goes after comb bee's honey. However, that also means, because of Vespiquen's Dex entry, that probably more than once, a Vespiquen has eaten a Teddiursa. Ursaluna's entry says, I believe it was Hisui's swampy terrain that gave Ursaluna its burly physique and newfound capacity to manipulate peat at will. Another explanation of a Hisuian form/evolution. It's just the much swampier terrain compared to other regions. Sliggoo's entry says, a creature given to melancholy. I suspect its metallic shell developed as a result of the mucus on its skin reacting with the iron in Hisui's water. Two things. One, it developed a shell because there's more iron in the water, so that's interesting. And two, it's always sad. Just given to melancholy, which kind of makes me a little sad. Hisuian Gudra's entry says, able to freely control the hardness of its metallic shell. It loathes solitude and is extremely clingy. It will fume and run riot if those dearest to it ever leave its side. I think it's cool that it can control the hardness of its shell. That's really interesting. And also, this reveals that Gudra is still a Gudra. Rhyhorn's entry says, ludicrously strong. When it butts head with a mountain, it is the mountain that shatters. But its short legs struggle with turns, and it is incapable of stopping unless it collides with something. Apparently the Rhyhorn and Hisui are on some kind of steroids because the other Dex entries talk about how it can shatter skyscrapers. Not
mountains. Sudowoodo's entry says, though it pretends to be a tree, it fails to fool even children. To the touch, its body feels more like a rock than tree bark. Sudowoodo's extreme aversion to water merits special note. The later parts of that, we've known that. But the first part is so funny. Sudowoodo's so bad at its job that children can tell it's not a tree. Togetic's entry says, no records exist of Togetic being seen in the wilds. Rumors abound that it evolves under the loving care of a trusted human companion, upon whom the Pokemon then bestows great joy. This one is nonsense. There's literally a Togetic in the wild in Legends Arceus. I caught it. I used it on my team. The next entries are those for Porygon, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z. These Pokemon are ones created in modern times, and the only way they're obtainable in the Hisui region, 200 or so years in the past, is through space-time rifts, where they have shown up there, yoinked through space and time. So the Dex entries Professor Laventon writes for them because he can't find them anywhere else, and they involve technology that doesn't exist, are really fascinating. It has no discernible heartbeat and does not seem to draw breath, and yet it appears to function without issue. I cannot even begin to explain this utterly bizarre anomaly. A bizarre item caused this Pokemon to evolve. While it now exhibits many new gestures and expressions, its biology remains inscrutable. A curious item induced this evolution. The Pokemon's offensive capabilities have greatly increased, but the strangeness of its behavior has magnified in equal measure. This worries me. So Professor Laventon clearly has no idea how this modern technology Pokemon works, which makes perfect sense. He's also freaked out by Porygon Z, which I kinda get. Murkrow's entry says, widely shunned as a bearer of ill fortune. Upon crossing paths with this creature, I've been told one must chant, Workrum, Workrum, bad luck, don't come, as a protective incantation. I have Googled the word Workrum and can't find anything. So, is it just nonsense? They're telling people 100 years ago to just chant nonsense when you see a Murkrow? I don't know, it's very weird. Also, before we move on to the next Dex entry, don't forget to subscribe. Pretty please, that'd be great. Just go do it. We'll have a great time, I promise. Unknown's entry says, it is hard to believe these strangely shaped Pokemon are truly living creatures. I've pointed out that the species' many forms resemble writing from other lands. No one will take me seriously. This one, I'm just kind of offended on Professor Laventon's behalf. Unknown, like the Unknown writing is just pictures of Unknown. Why won't they take him seriously? Celio's entry says its white whiskers are very sensitive. Celio will balance Spheal on the tip of its nose, checking its scent and its feel to be sure the Spheal is healthy. Apparently the Celio in the Hisui region are more caring than in other regions. That's because its Sapphire entry says Celio often balances and rolls things on the tip of its nose. While the Pokemon is rolling something, it checks the object's aroma and texture to determine whether it likes the object or not. Other entries talk about Celio balancing Spheal on its nose, but not about how it's checking to make sure the Spheal is healthy, and I just think that's sweet. Remoraid's entry says, spits water from its mouth with incredible accuracy. It captures Burmy by shooting them down off the branches from which they dangle. This is the first we've learned about Remoraid hunting Burmy. All its other entries mention flying prey, and looks like Burmy would probably be a lot easier to hit. Octillery's entry says, while Octillery still shoots water from its mouth, the drastic anatomical difference between it and Remoraid meant that for a long time, no one believed the former evolved from the latter. The Pokedex is officially acknowledging the crazy difference between Remoraid and Octillery, and how they evolve into each other makes very little sense, and I love that they acknowledge that. Perugly's entry says, though impudent and difficult to tame, Perugly enjoys great popularity due to its fur, the beauty of which surpasses even Velveteen. Perugly has nice fur, which we did not know before this. Chatot entry says, a versatile performer skilled in the imitation of human speech. It is said that older, more experienced Chatot can even understand the meaning of the words they mimic. This is the first time it's been acknowledged that Chatot can learn the meaning of the words. So Chatot can be kind of smart. Dusknoir's Dex entry says, comes to those whose lives have come to an end and escorts their souls to the afterlife, known to mistakenly take the souls of those who yet have life left in them, albeit rarely. Dusknoir accidentally steals souls of people who aren't dead. Considering Dusknoir's history of putting prey in its belly, eating the soul, and then spitting out the soulless body, I'm not that surprised. Hisuian Basculin's entry says, though it differs from other Basculin in several respects, including demeanor, this one is gentle, I've categorized it as a regional form given the vast array of shared qualities. I think this is fascinating. Basculin in other regions are very violent and very aggressive, but Hisuian Basculin is gentle and in fact, very timid. It is so quick to run away, and it is so hard to hit Pokemon in the water. Do you know how long it took me to catch a Basculin? Basculegion's entry says, clads itself in the souls of comrades that perished before fulfilling their goals of journeying upstream. No other species throughout all Hisui's rivers is Basculegion's equal. We knew this about Basculegion before the game came out, because they just told us this, but it is still just insane that Basculegion's whole thing is that it's a collection of a bunch of dead Basculin. Finneon's entry says, what a gorgeous sight this Pokemon is as it swims with its long, pink-painted caudal fins fluttering behind it. Finneon's beautiful appearance has led to its nickname, Finery Fish. A lot of its other entries say that its nickname is the Beautifly of the Sea. So this Finery Fish nickname is apparently what they called it in the older times. Gliscor's entry says it glides soundlessly on pitch black wings and sinks sharp fangs into the throat of its prey. It takes on a look of satisfaction once it has entirely drained its prey of blood. Gliscor, I love you, man, but holy crap. None of its previous Dex entries talk about it draining blood, much less draining all of the blood and then being satisfied about it. And that is quite disturbing. I still really like it though. Very cool. Next, I wanted to talk about the Dex entries for Rotom's various appliance forms. The fact that you can get these in the Hisui region is kind of a gag, frankly, because somehow you can get the appliances from Ginter despite no one knowing what they are except the player. And the Dex entries reflect that. The oven is called a strange cauldron. The washing machine is called an odd bureau. The fridge is called a bizarre cupboard. The fan is called a mysterious contraption. And the lawnmower is called a misshapen wheelbarrow. This is what I was talking about why this Pokedex is interesting. Because we know about this technology, but the writers of the Dex don't, and I just think that's fun. Miss Magus' Dex entry says, the incantations Miss Magus chants can ward against misfortune, so a custom exists of inviting it into one's home. Incur the Pokemon's displeasure, however, and disaster will surely ensue. Previous entries talk about how Miss Magus' incantations can either curse people or occasionally do nice things, but this is the first time we've known about a custom of inviting it into your house. Seems like quite the risk, in my opinion. Clefable's entry says, legend says that on clear, quiet nights, it listens for the voices of its kin living on the moon. I too often think of my homeland so far away. I wanted to mention this not because of anything about Clefable, just because I think it's sweet that Professor Laventon is writing in homesickness into the Pokedex. Johtoan Sneasel's Dex entry says, this Pokemon shares roots with the Sneasel of Hisui, but unlike that species, this one is spiteful in personality. I hypothesize that water and earth can affect Sneasel's mind and body. This entry actually gives us more information about Hisui and Sneasel, that it's not spiteful. It's a poison type, but it's not a jerk, apparently. Also, the mentioning of I hypothesize that water and earth can affect Sneasel's mind and body is kind of, I expect that environment can cause regional variance, which is like, why did you even say that, dude? You've said that elsewhere in the Pokedex. Frostlass's entry says, a Pokemon inhabited by the soul of a woman who died bearing a grudge in the snowy mountains. Legends of Frostlass placing deathly curses on misbehaving men sends shivers down my spine. The legend about Frostlass being a reincarnated woman who died in the mountains, that's been around. But not the part about it placing curses on misbehaving men. Boys, men, treat women with respect because you just should, but also because a Frostlass could curse you. Hisuian Zorua's Dex entry says, a once departed soul returned to life in Hisui. Derives power from resentment, which rises as energy atop its head and takes on the forms of foes. In this way, Zorua vents lingering malice. Like with Basculegion, we knew about this before release, but it's still very disturbing. Hisuian Zoraworks entry says, with its disheveled white fur, it looks like an embodiment of death. Heedless of its own safety, Zoroark attacks its nemesis with a bitter energy so intense, it lacerates Zoroark's own body. Oh my God! We knew that Hisuian Zorua and Zoroark, super dark Pokemon. Like, vengeful, malice, treated poorly, died, came back to life, but like, Zoroark attacking and lacerating its own body and not caring because it's so anger-filled is really dark. And it's not even a dark type anymore. Hisuian Braviary's entry says, screaming a blood-curdling battle cry, this huge and ferocious Pokemon goes out on the hunt. It blasts lakes with shockwaves, then scoops up any prey that float to the water's surface. I just thought that was a really interesting hunting method. You know, just psychic bombing a lake. Lucario's entry says, a most gallant-looking creature. It emits energy waves and controls them with precision, using them to sense even faraway beings. I have given the name Aura to this power. Like with Laventon naming Oshawott shell the Scalchop, Laventon was the person to name Lucario's power Aura. Next is the Lake Trio, and I'll read all of their Dex entries in one go, because apparently, despite them being very cute and the source of humanity having a lot of important things about their minds, people were afraid of them. Uxie, a Pokemon feared but also respected for stealing away the memories of evildoers. I have found records that suggest Uxie holds dominion over knowledge. Mesprit, known as the being of emotion. In legend, this Pokemon was feared, as any who showed disrespect would have their emotions thrown into disarray. Azelf, the dreaded being of willpower. Legends tell of this Pokemon manipulating the will of its adversaries and turning them into puppets of its own. So, stealing memories, causing emotional disarray, and turning people into puppets. I do kind of get why they were afraid of them now, yeah. Heatran's entry says, stories tell of this Pokemon being birthed from the boiling magma within Mount Coronet. Its molten steel body holds many mysteries. Mount Coronet? What happened to Stark Mountain? I thought Firespit Island was also supposed to be Stark Mountain. What? Why are they talking about within the magma of Mount Coronet? When has Mount Coronet ever had magma? Cresselia's entry says, Cresselia is reminiscent of the crescent moon. It leaves a brilliant line of light in its wake as it flies across the night sky. I dare say it resembles the Heavenly Maiden who created the Milky Way. I could not figure out who this Heavenly Maiden is. So apparently it's some kind of spirit, religious thing among Laventon's people, and apparently Cresselia looks like her. Next, we'll be looking at both of Tornadus' Dex entries. Its Incarnate entry says, the storm-stirring Pokemon is said to cause the seasons to turn by whipping up the air. I suspect its human-like form to be a false one. Then its Therian entry says, an example of what is known as a form change, though I suspect this strange avian guise to be Tornadus' true form. Tornadus has been sighted crossing the ocean while in this form. While it's only Laventon's suspicions, and we've seen he can be wrong, I do think it's interesting that he has this perspective that the Therian forms are the true forms, whereas the incarnate forms are fake forms. Which is interesting because the incarnate ones were the first ones introduced. It'll be interesting to see if we ever get confirmation about whether he's right. Enamorus's Therian form entry says, a different guise from its feminine humanoid form. From the clouds, it descends upon those who treat any form of life with disrespect and metes out wrathful, ruthless punishment. Damn, cloud turtle, snake on its back lady thing. Pretty hardcore. Next, I want to read the entries for the origin forms for both Dialga and Palkia, them getting origin forms alongside Giratina. Dialga says, radiant light caused Dialga to take on a form bearing a striking resemblance to the creator Pokemon. Dialga now wields such colossal strength that one must conclude this is its true form. Then Palkia says it soars across the sky in a form that greatly resembles the creator of all things. Perhaps this imitation of appearance is Palkia's strategy for gaining Arceus' powers. Progressing through the plot of the game doesn't really explain how or why the origin forms of Dialga and Palkia happen, but these dex entries kind of do. It's the original forms of Dialga and Palkia that they had because they were more similar to Arceus, the one that created them. Then finally, Shaman Sky's entry says, upon taking in the scent of a particular rare flower, Shaman is enveloped in light and its tiny body transforms. I took a whiff of the flower myself, but alas, my body remained unchanged. I'm mentioning this because it's funny. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans. Gotta catch them all.
Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and I read through every single dex entry in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and compiled a list of all the ones that I thought were worthy of note, due to being disturbing, funny, crazy, weird, interesting, new info about old Pokemon, or whatever else. This is all of them. Meowscarada's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon uses the reflective fur lining its cape to camouflage the stem of its flower, creating the illusion that the flower is floating. I thought this was kind of fun and interesting because they definitely just could have had the flower be floating, but instead it's like, no, it's actually an illusion. Crocolore's Scarlet entry says the combination of Crocolore's fire energy and overflowing vitality has caused an egg-shaped fireball to appear on the Pokemon's head. I am one of, I'm sure, many people who thought it was just wearing a sombrero, which I feel like it's still intended to kind of look like that, but the fact that it's an egg in a bird's nest is interesting. And I don't fully understand it, because I'm not sure what that has to do with crocodiles. Skeledirge's Scarlet entry says, the fiery bird changes shape when Skeledirge sings. Rumor has it that the bird was born when the fireball on Skeledirge's head gained a soul. So the egg hatches, and it now is just like another being that's part of Skeledirge. There's gotta be some lore that explains this, but right now it's so confusing. Quaxly's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon migrated to Paldea from distant lands long ago. The gel secreted by its feathers repels water and grime. When Quaxly was first announced, a lot of people said, oh, why make this? It's just like Ducklet. But this indicates that Quaxly came from elsewhere, so maybe it used to be Ducklet and evolved into Quaxly once it was in Paldea, because there's no Ducklet in Paldea. Quaxly's Violet entry says, its strong legs let it easily swim around even in fast-flowing rivers. It likes to keep things tidy and is prone to overthinking things. This isn't any crazy lore, it's just like, I knew I liked Quaxly, he's just like me. Tarantula's Scarlet entry says, the ball of threads wrapped around its body is elastic enough to deflect the scythes of Scyther, this Pokemon's natural enemy. I always find it interesting when a dex entry mentions a new relationship between Pokemon that we didn't know about before. So the fact that Scyther attacks Tarantula, I just think that's fun. Well, not fun. It's bad for Tarantula. Or is it, because it deflects it? Before we move on to the next entry, quick favor to ask you, could you subscribe? That'd be great. Lots of fun Pokemon videos on the way. Hoppip's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is blown across vast distances by the wind. It is unclear where the Hoppip of Paldea originally came from. Then its Violet entry says, outside of cold regions, Hoppip can be found practically everywhere. This is because the wind carries this species all over the world. At some point, I'd be interested to see where Hoppip originally came from. A theory that I have is that eventually we'll get a regional Hoppip that's in the region where it started from, and that form is original Hoppip, and all the pink ones that went all over the world just evolved to be lighter and carried on the wind. Skiploom's Scarlet entry says, Skiploom enthusiasts can apparently tell where a Skiploom was born by the scent drifting from the flower on the Pokemon's head. I just think this is kind of silly. Like, no, yes, this is definitely from Johto.
And I would know, I'm a Skiploom enthusiast.
Jumpluff's Scarlet entry says, Jumpluff travels on seasonal winds. Once its cotton spores run out, its journey ends, as does its life. Okay, this isn't like crazy, you know? If the fire goes out on a Charmander's tail, it dies. Once the spores run out on a Jumpluff, it dies. But like, maybe consider not having your Jumpluff use cotton spore, cause it seems you might be expediting its demise. Fletchling's Violet entry says, Fletchling can be found in both rural and urban areas. They once had a huge territorial dispute with Squawkabilly, fights broke out all over town. Another interesting relationship between a new Pokemon and an older one, and also I wish I could see that from a safe distance. Talonflame's Scarlet entry says it has top-notch flying capabilities. It flies around easily even while carrying prey that weighs more than 220 pounds. This stood out to me because why is it so oddly specific? Why 220 instead of a more round number like 200? I looked up some Pokemon that weigh around 220 pounds, and two that stood out were Venusaur and Tropius. Is Talonflame preying on Venusaur and Tropius, and then somehow carrying their enormous carcasses? Gumshoe's Violet entry says, Gumshoe specializes in relentlessly tracking down prey. The simple-minded Squovet doesn't seem to provide Gumshoe enough challenge. First off, random shade thrown toward Squovet, but then also I just think it's funny that Gumshoe needs the challenge, you know? He's not fulfilled by preying on simple prey, you know? It's kind of like Nimona. Squovet's Scarlet entry says it stores berries in its cheeks. When there are no berries to be found, Squovet will stuff pebbles in its cheeks to stave off its cravings. This is cute and funny, but also kinda sad. Next, I want to talk about Vivillon. Vivillon has a bunch of different forms originally determined by the real-world region of the 3DS it was caught in. Scarlet and Violet add entries for all those different forms for the first time, but they all basically say the same thing, just swapping out the description of where it's from based on the form of Vivillon. But the entry that stands out to me is Vivillon's Fancy form, a form previously only obtainable through an event back in 2014 and no other time, but is now the only form you can get in Paldea. The Scarlet entry says the patterns on this Pokemon depend on the climate and topography of the land it was born in. This form is from a mysterious land. So not only were those fancy form Vivillons from that event almost a decade ago coming from Paldea, which makes you wonder if they had started any planning for Scarlet and Violet at that point in time, but also, why is the Dex calling it a mysterious land? We're standing in the middle of it. It's not that mysterious anymore. Corviknight's Scarlet entry says, Corviknight cannot serve as a taxi service in Paldea because the Pokemon's natural predators will attack it while it flies, endangering the customer. First off, I think it's strange that this giant metal bird has any predators at all, but also, we know what that predator is. We have to go out of order here in the decks for a little bit, but that predator is Tinkaton. Its Scarlet entry says this intelligent Pokemon has a very daring disposition. It knocks rocks into the sky with its hammer, aiming for flying Corviknight. And then if you look closely, the color of Tinkaton's hammer, what does it remind you of? Tinkaton is striking Corviknight out of the sky and ripping the metal off its body to make its freaking hammer. This creature is an enemy of Team Sky! Paldean Wooper's Scarlet entry says, after losing a territorial struggle, Wooper began living on land. The Pokemon changed over time, developing a poisonous film to protect its body. I always love when they explain why the change in form occurred for a regional variant, so I think this is fun. But also I wonder, who was the territorial struggle with? Clodsire's Scarlet entry says, when attacked, this Pokemon will retaliate by sticking thick spines out from its body. It's a risky move that puts everything on the line. During my Scarlet playthrough, I read that Dex entry and then proceeded to immediately see those spines come out, which was quite shocking. Oh, whoa! The spines. I have since learned that Clodsire is based on the Iberian ribbed newt, which is a creature that will puncture its own skin with its rib bones to act as a defense mechanism, which means those Clodsire spikes might be its bones. Bounsweet's Violet entry says, a greedent drawn in by the sweet scent of these Pokemon will tuck the Bounsweet in among the berries in its tail and carry them all away. This is funny to me, but also I'm just like, that Bounsweet's gonna get dropped off once the greedent realizes it's not a berry, and then it's gonna be like, how do I get home? I barely have legs. Steeny's Scarlet entry says, Steeny spreads a sweet scent that makes others feel invigorated. This same scent is popular for antiperspirants. First off, I would wear some Steeny antiperspirant. It'd be really funny to just walk around and people smell me and they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And then Steeny's Violet entry says, Steeny bounces energetically through the forests. If the rind that peels off its body is pulverized, it can be used to treat stomach pains. I always think it's interesting when they talk about what part of a Pokemon can be used for like food or medicine, because in modern entries, they never say, oh, you just eat this Pokemon. It's like, oh, this part that falls off, you know, we just pick it up. And they're trying to ease off on the whole fact that they eat Pokemon thing. Zarina's Violet entry says, this Pokemon launches fierce yet elegant kicks with its long, slender legs. It views Quaquaval as its rival. Please, next season of the Pokemon anime, Zarina and Quaquaval dance battle step up style. Carcoal's Violet entry says, due to the coal tar created inside it, the heap of coal on Carcoal's back never falls apart, even when the Pokemon rolls around at high speeds. I'm glad they explained it, because I've definitely looked at Carcoal before and been like, most of it would just like go away if it got tipped over. But apparently no, it's all held together. Oricorio Bile Style's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is incredibly popular, possibly because its passionate dancing is a great match with the temperament of Paldean people. I like that they acknowledged the fact that the Bile style, Bile being Spanish for dance, is based on the flamenco dance, which is a dance that comes from Spain. And Paldea is based on the Iberian Peninsula. Petalil's Violet entry says, if the leaves on its head are pruned with regularity, this Pokemon can be grown into a fine, plump shape. I just thought that this was a little funny and weird. Like, yes, you can grow your Petalil to be fine and plump. It's silly. Flapple's Violet entry says, it uses its own body fluid to repair its apple. Strong Flapple that have won many battles have apples that are clay colored all over. This is fascinating to me because it means that a Flapple that's older and been around for a while has had to repair its apple for a lot longer. And while it keeps the apple intact, the apple is getting older and thus changing color. And I really wish we could see that in the games. Squawkabilly has 4 different colors and different dex entries for each color. And it turns out these 4 different colors have differences beyond just their appearance. The green one's Violet entry says, green feathered flocks hold the most sway. When they're out searching for food in the mornings and evenings, it gets very noisy. The blue one's Violet entry says, blue-feathered Squawkabilly view their green-feathered counterparts as rivals, since the latter make up the largest, most powerful groups. The yellow one's Violet entry says, the yellow Squawkabilly are especially fierce. They've even been known to drive other bird Pokemon out of town. And then the white one's Violet entry says, though these Squawkabilly are the fewest in number, they have no trouble living in town since they blend in with the white buildings. So the green ones are the most common and have the most sway. The blue ones resent the green ones because of their larger numbers and influence. The yellow ones are jerks, and the white ones are the fewest in number, but are fine with just blending into buildings. Grabominable's Scarlet entry says, the detached pincers of these Pokemon are delicious. Some trainers bring Lechonk into the mountains just to search for them. Another instance of, oh hey, people eat some Pokemon parts, but it's the ones that have fallen off. But also, this is the first confirmation that Crabominable's pincers are delicious. We've known via previous generations that Crabrawlers are good, but now we know that Crabominables are too. Phanpy's Violet entry says, it is far stronger than it appears. If a Phanpy is swinging its trunk around and your arm gets hit by it, your arm bone will shatter. That is a little graphic and also terrifying. I like my arm bones being together. So, keep your distance from the tiny deadly elephant. Donphan's Scarlet entry says, Donphan is covered in tough hide, so even being hit by a car won't faze this Pokemon. However, it is extremely susceptible to rain. This seems odd to me because I know it's a ground type and ground is weak to water, but like so many of Phanpy's dex entries talk about how it lives on riverbanks. So with just that evolution, Donphan becomes that weak to just rain? Copperage's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon was brought to Paldea long ago by people from a faraway land. It's so strong that it can easily pull an airplane. Now your first instinct is probably, oh, that faraway land, it's gotta be Galar, right? Well, probably not. That's because Copperage's Sword entry says they came over from another region long ago and worked together with humans. Their green skin is resistant to water. So while it's possible that Copperage arrived in Paldea from Galar, it could also be the other way around, or both of them came from elsewhere. And I wonder, where is this elsewhere? Is it a region based on India because Copperage is inspired by Indian elephants? I don't know. I'd like to find out. Knucklestack's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon dry cures its prey by spraying salt over them. The curing process steals away the water in the prey's body. That is disturbing. I know. It's the animal kingdom. There is violence and murder everywhere. But also, is this fun little Minecraft frog draining the moisture of its prey while they're still alive? But then also it's in stark contrast to its evolution. Garganicle's Scarlet entry says, Garganicle will rub its fingertips together and sprinkle injured Pokemon with salt. Even severe wounds will promptly heal afterward. So with just one evolution, it goes from the salt violently draining the fluids from something to helping heal wounds. And that's just like, wow, this thing had therapy. Aracuta's Scarlet entry says, Aracuda can swim quickly, but only in a straight line. The ones that become sluggish from overeating are the first to be targeted by flocks of Wattrel. I thought Aracuda might be in a better situation because there's no Cramorant in Paldea, but nope. Wattrel still eat it. Then its Violet entry says it takes down prey by charging into them with its hard, pointed jaw. But Aracuta's eyesight is poor, so this tactic has a low success rate. Every time a Dex entry talks about, oh, this Pokemon attacks its prey by doing this, but actually it's kind of garbage at it. I just think that's funny. It's like, all right, throwing shade on these random Pokemon. Barraskewda's Scarlet entry says it spins its tail fins to leap from the water, then viciously bites down on Wingull flying close to the water's surface. That's a little horrifying, but also look what its Dex entry picture is. Yeah, that Wingull is moments from death. And then its Violet entry says it swims at speeds of over 100 knots and battles fiercely with pods of Finizen over prey. I just think it's interesting that Barraskewda and Finizen compete over prey. But also we just talked about how Barraskewda eats Wingull. Does that mean this adorable dolphin does too? Next up are Flabebe, Float, and Florges. And for the first time, we have different Dex entries for each color flower. All of Flabebe's just talk about basically which color flower it prefers, but Float and Florges have some more interesting details. For Float, it talks about how it uses the wavelengths of light that its flower emanates, and that's interesting. The red one's Violet entry says this Pokemon uses red wavelengths of light to pour its own energy into flowers and draw forth their latent potential. Then the blue one's Violet entry says it exchanges power with flowers via wavelengths of visible light. This form of Float can sync with the wavelength that produces the color blue. Who knew Float was so into wave physics? Then we also learned that the white flower variations of Float and Florges have powers beyond just their white flowers. White Flower Float's Scarlet entry says, Float that are fond of white flowers can also easily sync with flowers of other colors. Then White Flower Florges' Scarlet entry says, a flower garden made by a white flowered Florges will be beautifully decorated with flowering plants of many colors. Then its Violet entry says, a Florges adorned with white flowers can sync with the wavelengths of various colors to draw forth their power. This is both interesting and makes scientific sense, because white light is all colors of light all at the same time. And since they're using the wavelengths of light, it tracks that the white Float and Florges can utilize multiple colors all at the same time. But then in addition to this fun science stuff, some of Florges' Dex entries show me that it's way more violent than I thought it was. The orange one's Scarlet entry says its orange flowers fire off powerful beams, attacking as if they were a battery of artillery. Then the blue one's Scarlet entry says, though usually compassionate, Florges will hunt down anyone who vandalizes its flower garden, showing no mercy even if they beg for their lives. Yeah, it's a little dark for this cute flower Pokemon. Oh, but also we learned one more interesting fact about Florges. The blue one's Violet entry says blue pigments were tremendously expensive in the past, so paintings of blue Florges are highly valuable. And I just think that's interesting. It's really all I have to say over the whole no mercy even if they beg for their lives thing. Arceus Scarlet entry says this Pokemon lives in nests that are made in the ground. People in ancient times used its tusks as cooking knives. I think that's interesting. I love hearing about how people interacted with Pokemon in ancient times. Really hoping for another Legends game. Fracture's Violet entry says, Fracture uses its thick tusks to neatly cut prey into 2 portions. One to eat now and one to save for later. Little graphic, thinking about it slicing a carcass in half. But also, we respect a Pokemon that eats its leftovers. Annihilape's Scarlet entry says, when its anger rose beyond a critical point, this Pokemon gained power that is unfettered by the limits of its physical body. This is hardcore and awesome because it's referencing a previous generation Dex entry for Primeape. Primeape's Sun entry says it has been known to become so angry that it dies as a result. Its face looks peaceful in death, however. Definitely a Dex entry I've discussed in previous videos, but now think about it. Some Primeape just get so angry and they just die. But then some, instead of dying, they release themselves from the bounds of their physical bodies and become an Annihilape. Like a new evolution inspired by a Pokemon's previous generation Dex entry. That's so creative and so cool. Cerulege's Scarlet entry says, the fiery blades on its arms burn fiercely with the lingering resentment of a sword wielder who fell before accomplishing their goal. Then its Violet entry says, an old set of armor steeped in grudges caused this Pokemon's evolution. Cerulege cuts its enemies to pieces without mercy. Yeah, it's just pretty dark. Just some dark stuff, as they tend to do with ghost-type Pokemon. Gumi's Violet entry says, Gumi's horns are excellent sensory organs that cover all 5 of Gumi's senses. Gumi picks up on danger from the movement of the air. We've known that Gumi's horns are sensory organs for a while, but what sticks out to me is that it's all 5 senses, which is just like, I just picture it like its horn accidentally touching like a tree branch and being like, oh, that's pretty woody. Goodra's Violet entry says, this Pokemon is uncontrollable when enraged. It rampages on and on, lashing its tail with enough power to send a dump truck flying. I thought it was strange that Goodra got this Dex entry because most of its Dex entries talk about how it loves its trainer and gives it slimy hugs. But this one is like, when it becomes enraged, it's really destructive, which is something they usually use to describe other pseudo-legendary Pokemon, like Salamence. Watchroll's Violet entry says, these Pokemon make their nests on coastal cliffs. The nests have a strange crackling texture, and they're a popular delicacy. Question, why are people eating nests? Is this something people do in real life? I don't know, but to me it seems like that aren't nests usually made of twigs or like straw? Like, why would you want to eat that? Especially one that's crackling with electricity. Deerling is yet another Pokemon that's gotten different Dex entries for its different forms for the first time. And 4 of those Dex entries let us know that each different form has a different smell. The spring form smells delicate, sweet, and calming. The summer has a distinct grassy smell. The autumn one smell is softly sweet, and the winter one has hardly any scent at all. But then in addition to that, we've also learned that Deerling can be pests. The spring form's Violet entry says, despite Deerling's adorable appearance, farmers consider it a nuisance since it loves plant shoots and will eat them all up. Then the summer form's Scarlet entry says, to prevent Deerling from entering their fields, many farmers will have several Lycanrocs stand guard, as they are the natural enemy of Deerling. First off, I think it's fascinating that this very cute thing is actually a pest, but also Lycanroc, natural enemy of Deerling? I think Lycanroc just eat it. How is that natural enemy? It's a predator-prey relationship here. I also think it's funny that farmers are using wolves to defend their farms, when in most of human history, farmers would have to defend their farms from wolves. There are a couple other fun facts about Deerling we learn as well. The autumn form's Scarlet entry says, these Pokemon are not shy. They will behave as they please, even in front of people. If you feed one of them, it will quickly take a liking to you. Then the winter form's Violet entry says, this Pokemon will playfully headbutt those it gets along well with. It has antlers hidden under its flower, so the headbutts are a little painful. So we learn the autumn form is very brazen and is very loyal if you feed it. And the winter form actually has antlers hidden under its flower, which is fascinating because I don't think we've ever seen those before. And then, like Deerling, Sawsbuck also gets different entries for all its different forms for the first time. And half of those 8 dex entries discuss how there are many Sawsbuck enthusiasts, just like Skiploom enthusiasts, which weird, but also those enthusiasts prefer different things about different Sawsbuck forms that indicate more beauty for a specific Sawsbuck. They like paler flowers on the spring form, thicker and larger branches on the summer form, darker red foliage on the autumn form, but then the winter form gets cast aside. Its Violet entry says, though there are many enthusiasts for Sawsbuck as a species, this seasonal form in particular is not very popular. How dare you? You call yourselves Sawsbuck enthusiasts? Then look over what is probably the coolest form with its beautiful and majestic chest fur and foot fur and bright white antlers? Nay, how dare you defame this Sawsbuck? This is a winter Sawsbuck fan club from here on out. Anybody who doesn't like it can get out! But aside from the Sawsbuck enthusiast lore, we learn a lot of other interesting facts about all the different forms. The spring form Scarlet entry says, it seems that a Sawsbuck with many flowers on its antlers will grow at a slightly slower pace because the flowers absorb the Pokemon's nutrients. Interesting how more flowers indicates a potentially less healthy Sawsbuck. The summer form's Violet entry says, this Pokemon's leaves can be made into a black tea, the taste of which varies depending on the region of origin. Paldea's is especially aromatic. I would like to try Sawsbuck leaf tea. I wonder if it would be black or green. Or chamomile? I don't know how tea works. The autumn form's Violet entry says, Sawsbuck in their autumn form are known for having very short tempers. The males fight each other incessantly. This tracks with the dex entry I mentioned earlier for Deerling's autumn form, how they behave as they please and don't really care if people are watching. So they go from being kind of a, I'll do what I want, I don't care, to just being really angry and aggressive. But then, the winter form's Scarlet entry says, it's said that Sawsbuck are calm and easy to tame during the season when they take on this form. So it's the perfect time to make one your partner. So it seems that Sawsbuck get really irritable and aggressive when their leaves are starting to fall off. But then, the winter happens, they lose all their leaves, and they're like, you know what, this is fine, I'm chill now. Or it's seasonal depression. Farigaraph's Scarlet entry says, now that the brainwaves from the head and tail are synced up, the psychic power of this Pokemon is 10 times stronger than Giraffarigg's. This is funny, because no, it's not. Giraffarigg's base special attack is 90, and Farigaraph's is 110. That is very far away from being 10 times. But also, they definitely could not actually multiply it by 10. Like, could you imagine if Farigiraf had 900 base special attack? There's nothing that even has that much as a total. Mastiff's Scarlet entry says, it always scowls in an attempt to make opponents take it seriously, but even crying children will burst into laughter when they see Mastiff's face. This is adorable and very funny. Pachirisu's Scarlet entry says, it's one of the kinds of Pokemon with electric cheek pouches. It shoots charges from its tail. To my knowledge, this is the first time that a dex entry is acknowledging that Pika clones are just like a class of Pokemon. I could be wrong, but to me it's like, oh, it's one of the kinds of Pokemon with electric cheek pouches. You could just say, it's one of the Pika clones. Stantler's Violet entry says, it's said that this Pokemon used to be stronger long ago when it had many enemies, and that it was even able to evolve under its own power. This is talking about Weird here, and I think it's cool that the Dex is acknowledging this. It's the only instance in the Paldea Pokedex that I could find, and I think it's cool that they're doing it. Fungus's Scarlet entry says, there's a theory that the developer of the modern-day Pokeball really liked Fungus, but this has not been confirmed. All of Fungus's previous Dex entries are basically like, no one knows why. It looks like a Pokeball, which I've thought is just lazy design. You know, there should be a reason that this organic creature looks like a man-made device. However, this is a theory that kind of explains it. If Fungus was around first and the modern Pokeball designer copied it, then that actually makes sense. Amungus's Scarlet entry says, be wary of the poisonous spores it releases. Mushrooms resembling Amungus's caps will grow out of anywhere the spores touch. First off, I think it's fun that it can grow more Pokeball mushrooms, but also they'll grow out of anywhere the spores touch. Like maybe your skin? Ursaring's Scarlet entry says, it usually wears a hardened expression, but when it's licking up honey, which it loves, the joy it feels will cause it to break into a wide grin, which is just adorable. Then its Violet entry says, it's quite skilled at climbing trees. If it comes across a primate while searching for berries in the treetops, trouble will surely ensue. Another conflict between wild Pokemon that's fun to learn about. Although I feel like primate definitely has the advantage, considering the whole fighting versus normal thing. Go-Goat's Scarlet entry says, it can sense the feelings of others by touching them with its horns. This species has assisted people with their work since 5,000 years ago. That's really cool. And it's also about how long it's been since Go-Goat was in a game, you know? So he's back. Go-Goat is back! Blazebreed Tauros' Scarlet entry says, when heated by fire energy, its horns can get hotter than 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Those gored by them will suffer both wounds and burns. That's, you know, but also, I think it would cauterize the wounds it creates. So I feel like it would be like, you know, it'd be really bad, but also, I feel like you're not gonna bleed out. Aquabreed Tauros' Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon blasts waters from holes on the tip of its horns. The high pressure jets pierce right through Tauros' enemies. Water jets have been used to cut things for a long time, but it's kind of disturbing to think about it happening to me. Then its Violet entry says, it swims by jetting water from its horns. The most notable characteristic of the Aqua breed is its high body fat, which allows it to float easily, which is fun, and a lot cuter than the last entry. Litleo's Scarlet entry says, when Litleo are young, female Pyroar will teach them how to hunt. Once the Litleo mature, they will leave the Pride and set out on their own. Then Pyroar's Scarlet entry says, the females of a Pride work together to bring down prey. It's thanks to them that their Pride doesn't starve. These are the first Dex entries that discuss Litleo and Pyroar having the same Pride behavior as real-life lions. So that's cool. Gothorita's Violet entry says, using its psychic power, it arranges pebbles to form the shapes of constellations. Some people believe this Pokemon came from outer space. This is the first mention of Gothorita being a Pokemon people think came from space, so it's joining the ranks of LGM and Clefairy and whatever else. Gothitel's Scarlet entry says, Gothitelle unleashes psychic energy and shows opponents dreams of the universe's end. These dreams are apparently ethereal and beautiful. Then its Violet entry says, it gazes at the stars to predict the future. It acts somewhat detached because it has seen the end of all existence. We're getting kind of existential here, and also it's crazy that this thing can see many, many billions of years into the future, or trillions. When is the predicted heat death of the universe? The heat death will occur in 1.7 times 10 to the 106th power years. That's a long way to see into the future. It's ethereal and beautiful, though. It'll just be heat death. It'll just be everything going to nothing. Anyways, Mimikyu's Violet entry says, Mimikyu was only recently identified as a Pokemon. Previously, people thought it was just a ghost wearing a cloth. I think this is silly because we very much established that ghosts are Pokemon. Doesn't matter if you're a ghost of a person, you end up in some kind of object and boom, you're a Pokemon now. Bramblin's Scarlet entry says, a soul unable to move on to the afterlife was blown around by the wind until it got tangled up with dried grass and became a Pokemon. What did I just say? What did I just say? Ghosts becoming Pokemon. It's a whole type for a reason. Bramblegast's Scarlet entry says it will open the branches of its head to envelop its prey. Once it absorbs all the life energy it needs, it expels the prey and discards it. There seem to be a lot of Pokemon that do this, that just absorb the life energy of something and then discard what's left. And I just think that's disturbing every time I read it. Then its Violet entry says, Bramblegast wanders around arid regions. On rare occasions, mass outbreaks of these Pokemon will bury an entire town. This is interesting because it can actually happen. There are news stories out there of entire towns getting just buried in tumbleweeds. So I think it's cool that they mentioned that as a nod to something that can happen in real life. Toadschool's Scarlet entry says, Toadschool lives in muggy forests. The flaps that fall from its body are chewy and very delicious. Yet another Dex entry talking about a thing that falls off a Pokemon being edible and tasty. Then its Violet entry says, though it looks like Tentacool, Toadschool is a completely different species. Its legs may be thin, but it can run at speeds of 30 miles an hour. The first part is demonstrating that it's a convergent evolution with Tentacool, which we've known about since Wiglet was announced. It's cool, it's interesting, it's fun. But also, you expect me to believe that this thing with tiny little things for legs can run 30 miles an hour? The fastest a person has ever run is 27.5 miles an hour. Why can this little mushroom go faster than us? Toad Squirrel's Violet entry says it coils its 10 tentacles around prey and sucks out their nutrients, causing the prey pain. The folds along the rim of its head are a popular delicacy. This creature destroys its prey by sucking its life energy, and we're gonna go out of the way to specify that it causes agony in its victim. But also, you know, part of its head tastes good. Fomantis's Violet entry says, many trainers give their Fomantis their own flower pots so they can sunbathe in peace and quiet. This is very cute. Lurantis's Scarlet entry says, by masquerading as a bug Pokemon, it lowers the guard of actual bug Pokemon lured in by a scent of sweet flowers. Its sickles bring them down. This sort of contradicts a previous Dex entry. Its Ultra Sun entry says, for self-protection, it pretends to be a bug Pokemon. So it seems like the Lurantis in Alola maybe use their disguise more self-defense, but the ones in Paldea use it more as a hunting technique. Cloth's Scarlet entry says, Cloth hangs upside down from cliffs waiting for prey, but Cloth can't remain in this position for long because its blood rushes to its head. Yet another one of a Pokemon using a hunting technique and not being that great at it. Capsaikid's Violet entry says, traditional Paldean dishes can be extremely spicy because they include the shed front teeth of Capsaikid among their ingredients. Another discarded Pokemon part being used in food, but also the teeth? The teeth? You could have done like the leaves on its head. Why the teeth? Scovillain's Scarlet entry says, the red head converts spicy chemicals into fire energy and blasts the surrounding area with a super spicy stream of flame. Then its Violet entry says, the green head has turned vicious due to the spicy chemicals stimulating its brain. Once it goes on a rampage, there's no stopping it. This isn't extremely explicit, but since the two entries talk about different heads and only one discusses fire, to me it seems like the red head is the one breathing fire and the green head is using the grass attacks, I think. Relor's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon creates a mud ball by mixing sand and dirt with psychic energy. It treasures its mud ball more than its own life. To me, it seems like this Pokemon just has poor judgment. And then we go to its evolution, Rabsca, and its two Dex entries seem to contradict each other. Its Scarlet entry says, the body that supports the ball barely moves, therefore, it is thought that the true body of this Pokemon is actually inside the ball. But then in Violet, an infant sleeps inside the ball. Rabsca rolls the ball soothingly with its legs to ensure the infant sleeps comfortably. So what is going on here? Is the true body of the Pokemon in the ball? Or is the true body the bug and there's a baby it's trying to raise in the ball? Or is the body dead? Does Relor die when it evolves? Or does it like die and give birth? What is happening here? Espathra's Violet entry says, it emits psychic power from the gaps between its multicolored frills and sprints at speeds of greater than 120 miles an hour. That is very freaking fast. And also, just a data point to potentially create a formula for what is a base speed stat to a real speed. Espathra's is 105, which is pretty fast. So I guess the base speed to mile an hour is add 15, multiply by like a percentage. I don't know, that's a preposterous speed for the Lady Gaga ostrich. Mudsdale's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon has been treasured not just for its physical labor, but also because it produces high quality mud used for making pottery. I thought this was interesting. Previous entries have said how its mud is used to coat the sides of houses to help protect them from the elements. And I also think it's fun that people in Paldea use it to make pottery. Larvesta's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon was called the larva that stole the sun. The fire Larvesta spouts from its horns can cut right through a sheet of iron. This confuses me because previous entries talk about how people said it's the larva born from the sun, not the one that stole the sun? Or are they saying it stole the sun because it looks like the sun is in its body? It's just kind of confusing. Then its Violet entry says, in ancient times, Larvesta was worshipped as the emissary of the sun. However, it was also viewed as a burden since it often caused forest fires. Some people worshipped it, some people didn't like it. That's the exact same thing that happens with Volcarona. Its Scarlet entry says its burning body causes it to be unpopular in hot parts of the world, but in cold ones, Volcarona is revered as an embodiment of the sun. Volcarona also caused problems when it would scatter its flaming scales. However, it's not causing the problems you would think. Its Violet entry says this Pokemon scatters burning scales. Most of the danger of these scales is not in the heat, it's in the way they rob the surrounding air of oxygen. Volcarona isn't just burning things down, it's suffocating people. It is insane how this Pokemon is either freaking awful or is saving lives after volcanic eruption. Like, it is on both ends of the good-bad spectrum. Tinkatuff's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon will attack groups of Poniard and Bisharp, gathering metal from them in order to create a large and sturdy hammer. Like with Tinkaton discussed earlier in this video, this line just likes to kill steel types so it can make tools, which is kinda morbid for the cute pink gingerbread people. Morgrum's Scarlet entry says Morgrum prefers dirty tactics like ambushing because it doesn't have confidence in its brawn. I just think it's funny that Morgrum is aware that it's a little skinny. Grimmsnarl's Violet entry says it lives deep within the forest. Even after evolving into this splendid form, it hasn't given up on its petty misdeeds and pranks. What stands out to me in this Dex entry, the fact that it is referred to as a splendid form. Whoever wrote this, probably Jacques, thinks Grimmsnarl is splendid. And that's really funny. Maybe it's because they have the same color hair? Wiglet's Violet entry says, though it looks like Diglett, Wiglet is an entirely different species. The resemblance seems to be a coincidental result of environmental adaptation. We've known about this since Wiglet was announced, but I wanted to mention it for those of you who missed it. Wiglet, along with Toadschool, are not variants of Diglett and Tentacool. They are convergent evolutions, completely unrelated species who happen to evolve into similar environmental niches. Halucha's Violet entry says, Halucha live quietly without flocking together. They fight constantly with their natural enemies, noisy groups of Primeape. So both Ursaring and Halucha don't get along with Primeape. Noibat's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon emits ultrasonic waves from its large ears to search for fruit to eat. It mistakes Applin for its food, which I feel like is an understandable mistake. Noivern's Violet entry says, in the dark, even Hydreigon are terrified of this Pokemon, but in the light, Noivern is the one that avoids battle. It's so strange to think about Hydreigon being scared of anything, but if you think about a Noivern being the one that can see you, but you can't see it, I get it. Dreepy's Scarlet entry says, in the evening, groups of Dreepy will fly at high speeds over the ocean and poke at Pokemon in the water for fun. So I guess Dreepy are kind of mischievous little jerks. Then its Violet entry says it has a habit of biting at Clauncher even though it doesn't feed on them. This is said to be vestigial behavior from when Dreepy was alive. Dreepy is dead, if that wasn't clear. If you're confused by when Dreepy was alive, that's explained in its Sword Dex entry. After being reborn as a ghost Pokemon, Dreepy wanders the areas it used to inhabit back when it was alive in prehistoric seas. So basically what these Dex entries are saying together is that in prehistoric times when Dreepy wasn't a ghost, maybe it was a dragon water type, it fed on Clauncher or something similar. And its memories from that time are still there, so it repeats that habit even though it doesn't eat Clauncher anymore. Dracloak's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon flies around at over 120 miles an hour. If a Dracloak is defeated in a battle, its Dreepy will wander off without a second thought. Once again, Dreepy seem to be jerks. Dragapult's Scarlet entry says, Dragapult can make its whole body transparent by clearing its mind and focusing. Even the Dreepy and Dragapult's horns become invisible. That's just objectively cool. It can turn invisible, along with the Dreepy. I just think that's awesome. Glamora's Violet entry says, Glamora's petals are made of crystallized poison energy. It has recently become evident that these petals resemble Terra Jewels. The only place you can find Glamora in the wild is deep within Area 0, where the Terra crystals are. So clearly this Pokemon was born from there, somehow. Wash Rotom's Violet entry says, the model of washing machine that Rotom can inspirit has been discontinued, so these appliances are now traded at high prices. This is silly to me.
Why can Rotom only inhabit a certain model of washing machine? It can inhabit all kinds of different appliances. You would think it could inhabit a different type of washing machine. Fan Rotom's Violet entry says there are several appliances that Rotom can inspirit, but the first one to be developed was the electric fan. I did a bit of Googling about all the other appliances. When was the first time an electric version of this appliance was invented? And the first one was indeed the electric fan in 1886. Greavard's Scarlet entry says, it is said that a dog Pokemon that died in the wild without ever interacting with a human was reborn as this Pokemon. That's just kinda sad. But also, what do you expect? It's a ghost type Pokemon, they're all sad or evil. Houndstone's Violet entry says, a lovingly mourned Pokemon was reborn as Houndstone. It doesn't like anyone touching the protuberance atop its head. This one is kinda nicer, you know? A beloved family pet passed away, and then it came back as a zombie, but it's a friendly one. Orangaru's Scarlet entry says, people used to mistake Orangaru for a human when they saw it issue command after command to the other Pokemon of the forest. To me, I can only really understand this if you saw it from the back, really far away. Because if you saw it from the front, it's very clearly a monkey. Passimian's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon battles by throwing hard berries. It won't obey a trainer who throws Pokeballs without skill, which means Nimona can never use a Passimian. On the Scarlet website, it mentions how she's not very good at throwing Pokeballs. It's why she wears that Steph Curry shooting sleeve. Stonejorner's Scarlet entry says, the elemental composition of the rocks that form its body were found to match the bedrock of a land far away from this Pokemon's habitat. This is a reference to Stonejorner's inspiration, Stonehenge. The rocks at Stonehenge are not rocks that are found in that local area. Sandygas Scarlet entry says, if it loses its shovel, it will stick something else, like a branch, in its head to make do until it finds another shovel. Then its Violet entry says, it flings sand into the eyes of its prey and tries to close in on them while they're blinded. But since Sandygast is so slow, the prey tends to escape. Both of these dex entries amuse me because they're kind of lighthearted, silly, cute things about a Pokemon whose previous dex entries can get kind of dark. Palisand did not get the same treatment. Its Violet entry says, from the hollows in its arms, it fires the bones of its victims, which are all dried up after being drained of their vitality. Previous entries have discussed how Palisand drains the life energy of Pokemon, ends up with bones under it, really dark, really gross. But this takes it a step further. It then uses those bones as bullets? Like, could you imagine seeing this sandcastle sending out into battle for a friendly gym battle, and then it starts shooting bones? Anyways, on a lighter topic, let's talk about Shellos and global warming. West Shellos' Violet entry says, it oozes a purple fluid to deter enemies. Apparently, there are more West Sea Shellos now than there were in the past. Then, the East Shellos' Scarlet entry says, a recently published research paper states that this form of Shellos is gradually decreasing in number. The increase in West Shellos and decrease in East seems to be due to global warming. West Shellos' Sword entry says this Pokemon's habitat shapes its physique. According to some theories, life in warm ocean waters causes this variation to develop. Then the East form's Shield entry says its appearance changes depending on the environment. One theory suggests that living in cold seas causes Shellos to take on this form. Ocean waters are heating up, which means more of the warm water West Shellos and less of the cold water East Shellos. And it's kind of sad. But then we get to Gastrodon and it completely flips things? West Gastrodon's Scarlet entry says its whole body is sticky with mucus. In the past, this form of Gastrodon was by far the more numerous one. Then East Gastrodon's Violet entry says, fishers say that they did not see many of these Pokemon in the past, but this form of Gastrodon is now increasing in number. What is going on? You've got West Shellos going up in number, but West Gastrodon going down. And then East Shellos going down in number, but East Gastrodon going up. What is going on here? This is a biological and ecological mystery that I must know the answer to. Or they just made a typo and flipped them in the dex entries by accident. I do have one more Gastrodon dex entry to mention though. The West Form's Violet entry said, it appears on beaches where the waters are shallow. Once it catches prey, it will slowly melt them with its mucus before slurping them up. Just wanted to mention this because it's gross and disturbing. Skrelp's Violet entry says, this Pokemon is a poor swimmer. If it's caught in a fierce storm, it will sometimes get washed far away and become unable to return to its home, which is just kind of sad.
Dragalge's Violet entry says, since Finizen is the better swimmer, Dragalge will approach it under the cover of seaweed, then immobilize it with a poisonous attack. So Dragalge preys on Finizen. Although it makes me wonder, since Finizen and Barraskewda compete for prey, does Dragalge prey on Barraskewda too? Clauncher's Violet entry says, Clauncher's claws will regrow if they fall off. Meat inside the claws is edible, but it has a distinct flavor that doesn't appeal to all tastes. This is a contradiction with previous Dex entries. Not the fact that it's edible, but about how it tastes. Its Ultrasun entry says its claws occasionally fall off and it keeps a low profile until they grow back. The meat of its claws is so delicious. Then in Sword, Clauncher's claws can fall off during battle, but they'll regenerate. The meat inside the claws is popular as a delicacy in Galar. So this means one of two things. One, the Clauncher and Paldea just don't taste as good to the general population, or two, Jacques just doesn't like Clauncher claws, and he's inserting his personal bias into this Pokedex. Marini's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon wanders the seaside looking for food. It often gets electric shocks from broken Pincurchin spines that it tries to eat. This is just kind of funny. Toxapex's Violet entry says, Toxapex gets into fierce battles with Bruxish over areas where warm ocean currents flow, but the odds are always against it. Another natural enemies Dex entry here, but also the results of the battles tend to make sense. Bruxish, Psychic type. Toxapex, Poison type. Bruxish, clear type advantage here. Flamigo's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon apparently ties the base of its neck into a knot so that the energy stored in its belly does not escape from its beak. Okay. How does it eat? If energy can't get out, how the heck is food supposed to get in? Cubchoo's Scarlet entry says, many of this species can be found along the shorelines of cold regions. If a Cubchoo lacks dangling snot, there's a chance it is sick. A chance it's sick? Previous Dex entries talk about how the snot is a barometer for its health. If it's watery and runny, then it's not doing well. If it's not there at all, something is very wrong. Beartic's Violet entry says, feared as the Snow White demon in northern lands, Beartic uses its frosty claws and fangs to attack prey. Just thought it was interesting, it had a specific nickname. This is the first we're hearing of it, called the Snow White demon. I feel like they could have named something different because it just makes me think of the princess. Cryogonal's Scarlet entry says, Cryogonal appear during cold seasons. It is said that people in Pokemon who die on snowy mountains are reborn into these Pokemon. I am calling BS. People are just saying that, but it's not a ghost type. If it was a ghost type, I'd believe it in a heartbeat, but this is just a pure ice type. You're just telling stories to scare kids into staying home when there's a blizzard. Satottle's Scarlet entry says, this species left the ocean and began living on land a very long time ago. It seems to be closely related to Whalmer. I think Satottle and Satitan are interesting because whales started on land. They were kind of like almost wolf-like looking things, and then they evolved to go back into the ocean. Whereas Satottle and Satitan were in the ocean alongside Whalmer and then left. Opposite what the other whales did. Bergmite's Violet entry says, Bergmite protects itself by coating its body in ice formed by frigid air of minus 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It fights with Frigibax whenever they meet. So Bergmite can be a little feisty, especially with Frigibax. But then it evolves and it mellows out. Avalug's Scarlet entry says, as Avalug walks along with Bergmite on its back, it comes across pods of Satitan. It lets them pass to avoid conflict. Avalug learned that violence is not always the answer. And also I think it's cute. They call groups of Satitan pods, like groups of whales in the ocean. Bisharp's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon commands a group of several Pawniard. Groups that are defeated in territorial disputes are absorbed by the winning side. So that's how King Gambit happened. They win a lot of battles against rival Bisharp, absorb them, and then end up being the ruler of Bisharp and Pawniard, and that creates the evolution into King Gambit. However, turns out King Gambit may not be as good of a tactician as one might think. In fact, it's definitely not. King Gambit's Violet entry says, though it commands a massive army in battle, it's not skilled at devising complex strategies. It just uses brute strength to keep pushing. That is not always the best strategy, King Gambit. Think you should probably read some Sun Tzu Art of War, because what you're doing is not gonna work. Hydreigon's Violet entry says, it's said that Hydreigon grew ferocious because people in times long past loathed it, considering it to be evil incarnate and attacking it relentlessly. This one's like actually really sad Like, Hydreigon wasn't always this vicious monster. It was driven to this by the cruelty of humanity. I don't like that. Veluza's Scarlet entry says, when Veluza discards unnecessary flesh, its mind becomes honed and its psychic power increases. The spare flesh has a mild but delicious flavor. I just think the whole design basis of Veluza is a little weird. Like, it just like sheds its flesh on a regular basis. I wouldn't recommend that. Next up are Dondozo and Tatsugiri, and their dex entries further explain the relationship between them and why the commander ability happens in battle. Dondozo's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon is a glutton, but it's bad at getting food. It teams up with a Tatsugiri to catch prey. Then its Violet entry says it treats Tatsugiri like its boss and follows it loyally. Though powerful, Dondozo is apparently not very smart. So in short, Dondozo has the brawn, while Tatsugiri is the brains. Tatsugiri's droopy form's Scarlet entry says, this species' differing colors and patterns are apparently the result of Tatsugiri changing itself to suit the preferences of the prey it lures in. So not only is Tatsugiri the commanding tactician, but it's also the bait. The stretchy form's Scarlet entry says, bird Pokemon are its main prey. This Pokemon knows it's weak, so it hunts with a partner. The fact that it preys on bird Pokemon, I guess makes sense, because it's acting like oh, I'm a discarded fish. And then the bird Pokemon come down to get it, and then Dondozo is like, oh, hello. Finally, the stretchy form's Violet entry says it's one of the most intelligent dragon Pokemon. It camouflages itself by inflating its throat sac. So it's very intelligent, which makes sense. It's the tactician and the commander in the Dondozo-Tatsugiri relationship, but also it inflates its throat sac, which makes it look like nigiri over rice, and that's its camouflage? Next is a batch of Paradox Pokemon, and their dex entries need to be taken with a grain of salt. The Paradox Pokemon's dex entries in their own games are basically all just like, this appears to be the Pokemon described in the Scarlet book or the Violet book, because then you can read the book and get information about it, supposedly. So then in the other version, that's where the dex entries have the information. But they all talk about information about these Pokemon from the Occulture magazine, which gives very heavy National Enquirer vibes. So the information is basically all speculation. However, I'm still going to make fun of this information because it shouldn't have been included in the Pokedex, the lexicon of hardcore Pokemon data and knowledge, not speculation from Occulture magazine. In short, this information is almost certainly not accurate, but I'm still going to make fun of it because it was put in the dex. Screamtail's Violet entry says it resembles a mysterious Pokemon described in a paranormal magazine as a Jigglypuff from 1 billion years ago. 1 billion years ago? A billion? No. Do you know what life was on Earth 1 billion years ago? Single cell organisms. Not big Jigglypuff that look just like the ones we have today. Multicellular organisms didn't even show up until like 600 million years ago. No, 1 billion years ago is preposterous. Screamtail has gotta be way more recent. Brute Bonnet's Violet entry says it bears a slight resemblance to a Pokemon described in a dubious magazine as a cross between a dinosaur and a mushroom. It's not a cross between a dinosaur and a mushroom. It's just a more aggressive and meaner mushroom. Fluttermane's Violet entry says it has similar features to a ghostly pterosaur that was covered in a paranormal magazine, but the two have little else in common. Not a pterosaur, not a flying reptile. It flies, you know, and it's got some wings that like, I guess kind of look like that, but it's not any sort of related to like a pterodactyl. Sandy Shock's Violet entry says it slightly resembles a magneton that lived for 10,000 years and was featured in an article in a paranormal magazine. A magneton that lived for 10,000 years? Like, how would you know how long this thing lived? Are you just assuming like it's been alive for 10,000 years? Because it hasn't. It was brought here from a time machine. Iron Tread's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon closely resembles a scientific weapon that a paranormal magazine claimed was sent to this planet by aliens. Okay, all right, aliens? No. I mean, I guess maybe. Some Pokemon came from space. So I guess it's not outside of the realm of possibility, but we have no reason to believe why this wheel, Dawn Fan, came from outer space. Iron Bundle's Scarlet entry says its shape is similar to a robot featured in a paranormal magazine article. The robot was said to have been created by an ancient civilization. Ancient compared to who? Compared to us? No. No ancient society had the technology to make an entirely robotic bird. Ancient compared to the future? Like we make it in 100 years and this is from like 1,000 years in the future? That I would get. Iron Hand's Scarlet entry says it is very similar to a cyborg covered exclusively by a paranormal magazine. The cyborg was said to be the modified form of a certain athlete. It's unclear here whether the Hariyama was an athlete and then got modified, or if it was like a person athlete and then got modified and that turned it into a Pokemon. That can't be true. It's not a ghost type. Iron Jugulus's Scarlet entry says, it resembles a certain Pokemon introduced in a paranormal magazine, described as the offspring of a Hydreigon that fell in love with a robot. This is funny, but it's definitely complete nonsense. That's not how reproduction works. Iron Moth's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon resembles an unknown object described in a paranormal magazine as a UFO sent to observe humanity. Why would a UFO from space look just like our Volcarona? No, it's clear someone just built a robot that looks like Volcarona. Iron Thorn's Scarlet entry says it has some similarities to a Pokemon introduced in a dubious magazine as a Tyranitar from 1 billion years into the future. Again, with the stupid usage of billion. Do you know what the difference is between 1 million years and 1 billion years? It's about 1 billion years. There's not gonna be robots in 1 billion years. We're all gonna be dead. Probably. Dinosaurs didn't last for 1 billion years. The last 2 Paradox Pokemon don't come immediately after in the deck, so we'll get to those in a bit. Chest Form Gimmighoul's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon was born inside a treasure chest about 1500 years ago. It sucks the life force out of scoundrels who try to steal the treasure. 1, Gimmighoul is 1500 years old, which is very old for a Pokemon. And number 2, it's a ghost type, it sucks the life force, you know what they do. Then Roaming Form Gimmighoul's Violet entry, which is not currently available in the game, it wanders around carrying an old coin on its back. It survives by draining the life force from humans who try to pick up its coin. I picked up a lot of those coins in my playthrough. Is my life expectancy less now? Wo-Chien's Scarlet entry says, the grudge of a person punished for writing the king's evil deeds upon wooden tablets has clad itself in dead leaves to become a Pokemon. Wo-Chien exists because a scribe tried to record history and was punished by the king who didn't want that known. Qianpao's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon can control 100 tons of fallen snow. It plays around innocently by leaping in and out of avalanches it has caused. So, it's inconsiderate, but it's a ruined legendary. This is kind of their brand. Then its Violet entry says, the hatred of those perished by the sword long ago has clad itself in snow and become a Pokemon. So Wo-Chien's from a grudge, Qianpao's from hatred. What's next? Ting-Lu's Scarlet entry says, the fear poured into an ancient ritual vessel has clad itself in rocks and dirt to become a Pokemon. Then Chi-Yu's Violet entry says, the envy accumulated within curved beads that sparked multiple conflicts has clad itself in fire and become a Pokemon. A grudge, hatred, fear, and envy. Bundle of joy these Pokemon are. Roaring Moon's Violet entry says, according to an article in a dubious magazine, this Pokemon has some connection to a phenomenon that occurs in a certain region. This is talking about Mega Evolution. Roaring Moon has the same crescent wings as Mega Salamence. This is also further evidence that Mega Evolution reawakens a Pokemon's primal dormant genes from the past. Mega Aerodactyl's Ultra Moon entry says, Mega Evolution awakened some dormant genes, bringing back the sharp rocks that once covered Aerodactyl's entire body. Roaring Moon is proof that this is occurring not just for Aerodactyl, but multiple Mega Evolutions, maybe a bunch of different ones. Then finally, Iron Valiant's Scarlet entry says, it has some similarities to a mad scientist's invention covered in a paranormal magazine. This is one of the only future ones that I think makes sense. Like it being a robot built by a mad scientist, to me, that's logical here. I don't know at what point a robot turns into a Pokemon though. The future ones don't make as much sense as the past ones. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans. Gotta catch them all. Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and this video is gonna cover every Pokedex entry from Scarlet and Violet's DLC that I think is worthy of note, due to being crazy, interesting, funny, disturbing new info about old Pokemon or whatever else. And we'll start with the Kitakami Pokedex from the Teal Mask. Artisan Form Poltergeist Scarlet entry says it sprinkles some of its powdery body onto food and drains the life force from those who so much as lick it. What is it with ghost Pokemon draining life force? Like, is it ghost type or is it like leech type? Then its counterfeit form Scarlet entry says, supposedly, the regrets of a tea ceremony master who died before perfecting his craft lingered in some matcha and became a Pokemon. Okay, and regrets. Ghost Pokemon are just draining life force and regrets. Unremarkable form Sinistcha's Scarlet entry says it pretends to be tea, trying to fool people into drinking it so it can drain their life force. Its ruse is generally unsuccessful. I think it's kind of funny when Dex entries are just like, hey, this Pokemon does this thing, but it sucks at it. Next, I'm gonna cover the Loyal 3, and all 3 of their Scarlet Dex entries are in the same vein. Okidogi says after all its muscles were stimulated by the toxic chain around its neck, Okidogi transformed and gained a powerful physique. Then Monkey Dory says the chain is made from toxins that enhance capabilities. It stimulated Monkey Dory's brain and caused the Pokemon's psychic powers to bloom. Then for Pheasantipity, it says Pheasantipity owes its beautiful looks and lovely voice to the toxic stimulants emanating from the chain wrapped around its body. So all 3 of the loyal Pokemon looked and behaved differently until they received the toxic chain, which enhanced their capabilities and altered their appearance, and also maybe made them jerks. This has led to theories about what Pokemon the Loyal 3 were before becoming the Loyal 3. Okidogi was weak, so some people believe it used to be a Poochyena, or another small dog Pokemon like Rockruff. Pheasantipity used to be ugly, so there are theories that it used to be a Pidove, Tranquil, or Unpheasant, since they're both pheasant-based. When I saw this theory, female Unpheasant immediately stood out to me because it's intentionally supposed to be a drab Pokemon, so it would want to be more flamboyant. However, Pheasantipity is always male, so either male Unpheasant just like wasn't fancy enough, it was actually just a Tranquil that hadn't evolved yet, or it was a male Unpheasant that somehow looked like a female one, and therefore felt bad. Finally, Monkey Dory was a dumb Pokemon, but no monkey Pokemon are explicitly stated to be dumb. So there are theories based on just the body types like Thwackey or Monferno. Diplin's Violet entry says the head sticking out belongs to the foreworm, while the tail belongs to the core worm. The 2 share one apple and help each other out. I'm recording this half of the video before the Indigo Disc comes out, so as of right now, we know that Diplin's going to get an evolution because an Eviolite works on it. The fact that Diplin has 2 worms inside its apple seems to heavily imply that whatever it turns into is gonna have 2 heads.
Oh, no.
Hoothoot's Violet entry says, since it tells time precisely, some countries consider it to be a deity of wisdom, versed in the ways of the world. There's several things I find interesting about this. First, it mentions countries and not regions. Then also, it's a new fact about Hoothoot that we never heard before. And third, they think this little guy's a deity. He's just a little owl. Ariados' Scarlet entry says, a single strand of a special thread is endlessly spun out of its rear. The thread leads back to its nest. Kinda gross. But I have more to say once we read its Violet entry. It wanders in search of food after darkness falls, never nesting in a specific place. Hold on. You just said the thread leads back to its nest. But then, in the other one, it says it never nests in a specific place. 2 Dex entries in the same generation pair games directly contradicting each other. If there's another example of that, I can't think of it right now. Slugma's Scarlet entry says its lava body can cool and chip away at times, but a magma bath will heal it right up. Lots of Dex entries talk about how Slugma's body can cool and parts can chip off, but this is the first one to talk about the fact that it can get lost parts of its body back by taking a bath, and I just think that's nice. Then its Violet entry says, it's said in ancient times when volcanoes were more active, there were many more Slugma than there are now. I just think that's an interesting ecological change. Although, should we be worried about Slugma being endangered? Although, I suppose if Slugma's doing really well, then the rest of us are not. Macargo's Violet entry says, according to folklore, a sudden increase in the wild Macargo population heralds a volcanic eruption. This is according to folklore, not science. But once again, like if there's a lot of Slugma in Macargo, the rest of us probably are not doing great. Lotad's Scarlet entry says, the leaf on its head is naturally dirt repellent and will stay clean even after transporting Pokemon that are covered in mud. I just think that's nice. I've always liked Lotad, and you know, Despite being a swamp deller, he's a neat freak like me. Lombre's Scarlet entry says, old folklore in Kitakami tells of a mischievous child who was reborn as a Pokemon. This is interesting to me because lots of other Lombre Dex entries talk about it being mistaken for a child. But it seems in Kitakami that turned into a legend that it actually was a child. Then its Violet entry says it prefers waterfronts with plentiful food. It became nocturnal, so it wouldn't have to compete for food with bird Pokemon. Lots of previous entries talk about it being nocturnal, but this is the first one to give us a reason why. And I think that's fun. I think ecology and how environments interact is a fun thing to add and discuss in Pokemon. C.Dot's Scarlet entry says to expand its habitat, it pretends to be a nut, so that bird Pokemon will pick it up and carry it far away. Two things. One, apparently C.Dot is not actually a nut, which I think is a little odd because it is a grass-type Pokemon. But secondly, once again, another ecology strategy that I think is super interesting. Like, part of the reason fruit exists is so animals will eat it and then poop out the seeds elsewhere. I hope C.Dot isn't trying to get pooped. But like, maybe. Shifttree's Violet entry says, legends tell of a bird Pokemon that received divine punishment for its evil deeds and had its beak and wings replaced. This is so cool. I know it says it's just a legend and not anything confirmed, but like, there's a whole category of real Pokemon called legendary Pokemon. But regardless of whether it's real or not, the idea of Shifttree being a bird Pokemon in the past and looking like a Shifttree but a bird is so interesting. They could do a Paradox Pokemon that's a bird Shifttree. Like, I think that's so fascinating and so fun, and it's just so cool. Corfish's Scarlet entry says, it came from overseas. It's a very hardy creature that will quickly proliferate even in polluted streams. This is not new information. Most of Corfish's Dex entries say it came from overseas or from a foreign land or whatever, which means it's not native to most regions. The only ones that don't explicitly say it came from elsewhere are Sinnoh, Unova, and Kalos. And Unova and Kalos do have regional Dex entries for Corfish. So maybe Corfish originated from Unova or Kalos or Sinnoh. However, we don't know which one. But we do know it did not originate from Kitakami. Duskull's Scarlet entry says, in the dead of night, these Pokemon wander through towns in search of children, whose vital energy is a Duskull's favorite food. Again, with the ghost Pokemon, and sapping life energy from kids? Specifically? Yikes! Duskull? Then its Violet entry elaborates and says Duskull's victims suffer an intense chill as the Pokemon siphons their life force away, glaring at them with its bright red eye all the while. Oh my god, it is giving us more details about how it kills children. Sawaddle's Violet entry says, the bumps on their heads are sensory organs. When Sawaddle meet, they greet each other by rubbing these bumps together. Okay. Nice little palate cleanser there. That's just adorable. Leavanny's Scarlet entry says, this gentle Pokemon has strong protective instincts. The leaves on its arms are sharp enough to slice a thick tree in half with one stroke. Okay. Holy crap. Then its Violet entry says, it fashions clothing from woven leaves. Though gentle in disposition, it will show no mercy to foes who target young Pokemon. Well, thanks to the Scarlet entry, we know what happens to those foes. Bisection. Phantom's Scarlet entry says, legends tell that its green leaves can cure any illness. When plucked, however, the leaves will instantly wither away. This is just kind of funny. Like, they definitely don't cure any illness. It's just like people coming up with stories because like, oh, it is forbidden, it must be incredibly powerful. I think it's just like you cut a leaf off a plant, it's not gonna live. Grubbin's Violet entry says, it spits sticky threads and winds them around branches, then swings nimbly from tree to tree in a pendulum-like motion. Simply put, Grubbin is Spider-Man. Hakamo-O's Scarlet entry says, it gets into fistfights so intense that the scales on its arms peel off. Bare arms are a sign of valiance. Ew, just ew. Like, the specific word choice of peel grosses me out so much. Like, if it had just said fall, I would have been fine, but peel? Cramorant's Violet entry says, it's an incredibly poor learner because it uses the bare minimum amount of energy for its brain. It focuses on battling instead. This is just kind of funny. Cramorant's dumb. But also it leads into the next one. The Scarlet entry for its gorging form says its throat is clearly not wide enough to swallow a Pikachu, and yet Cramorant makes no moves to release its catch. Maybe it doesn't realize it can't swallow it, because it uses the minimum amount of its brain. And now for the final entries in the teal mask. Male Basculegion's Violet entry says it can jump with incredible power. Parts of its body are tinged red by the rage of its fallen friends. Then the Violet entry for the female one says it can afflict a target with terrifying illusions that are under its control. The deeper the sadness in its friends' souls, the paler Basculegion becomes. We didn't know this in Legends Arceus. These entries now give us a reason for why male and female Basculegion look different. Sad reasons, but they are reasons. And now for the Indigo Disc Dex entries. Dodrio's Scarlet entry says it now has 3 hearts and 3 sets of lungs. Though it can't run as fast as Doduo, Dodrio can keep running for longer stretches of time. Kinda weird to say it can't run as fast as Doduo, considering Dodrio's base speed is 110, while Doduo's is only 75. Then its Violet entry says, the strongest head with the thickest neck becomes the leader and gains primary control of the body. This is the first time it's mentioned that one of the 3 heads is the leader over the other 2. Rhyhorn's Scarlet entry says, Rhyhorn claims an area with over a 6-mile radius as its territory. It apparently forgets where this territory is when running, however. Then its Violet entry says once it starts running, it won't stop, even if it crashes through boulders. This disposition is what's caused its habitat to expand. Both of these together amuse me. It's got a huge territory because it just keeps running and forgetting where its territory was, and it's like, oh, this is my new territory. Rhydon's Violet entry says it evolved to walk using only its hind legs, which has allowed it to expand its habitat even onto steep mountains. It evolves and expands its habitat even more. Rhyperior's Violet entry says a Rhyperior's brain is smaller than a Rhydon's, but the Rhyperior is stronger because it spends more energy on battling and less on brain power. So this is kind of crazy. Apparently Rhyperior is dumber than Rhydon, but I do wonder if it's dumber than Rhyhorn. I feel like that would be really hard to pull off. Electabuzz's Violet entry says research is progressing on storing lightning in Electabuzz so this energy can be used at any time. Most of Electabuzz's Dex entries talk about it causing blackouts, so I think this is kind of a funny progression where it's like, oh, it was causing so many blackouts, what if we could repurpose it to do the opposite effect? Be a battery in case there's a blackout. Although in defense of Electabuzz, its Ultra Moon entry says, while it's often blamed for power outages, the truth is the cause of outages is more often an error on the part of the electric company. Keep your utility companies accountable, people. Don't let them toss the blame onto a Pokemon. Electivire's Scarlet entry says, when it gets excited, it thumps its chest. With every thud, thunder roars and electric sparks shower all around. That just sounds awesome. I have nothing else to add. Zebstrika's Violet entry says, once the herd hears thunder, it chases after the storm clouds so that the Blitzel in the group can use the lightning to charge up. First off, just want to say, love Zebstrika, glad to have it back. And as for the Dex entry, I just think it's cute that it charges after storms in order to help its young get more powerful. Milcery's Violet entry says, when attacked, it tackles its foes and covers them in cream. With its foe either blinded or astonished by deliciousness, Milcery flees. Astonished by deliciousness might be my favorite set of words in any Dex entry ever. Trapinch's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon lives in arid deserts. It patiently awaits prey inside its funnel-shaped nest. Normally I don't cover any Dex entries that are repeats of previous generation Dex entries, but I had to bring up this one because of what they did in the terrarium. They actually put these funnel-shaped nests with Trapinch at the bottom in the terrarium, and I really enjoyed getting to see that. It's the first time we've seen these nests anywhere other than New Pokemon Snap. Pikipek's Violet entry says, Pikipek has strong muscles in its neck, so it won't hurt itself even if it violently shakes its head. Well, it's gotta have the densest muscle mass ever because look at it, it barely has a neck at all. Toucanon's Violet entry says, pairs of Toucanon are considered symbols of companionship as these Pokemon will raise the temperature of their beaks to warm each other. We already knew that it was a symbol of harmonious couples, you know, it's brought to weddings at times, but I just think it's so cute that they have like toucan couples that like, oh, it's cold, let me warm you up with my beak. It's just nice. Tentacruel's Violet entry says, in battle, it extends all 80 of its tentacles to entrap its opponent inside a poisonous net. Okay, this is a repeated Dex entry from previous games, but I have to talk about it because for 25 years, they've been trying to tell us that Tentacruel has 80 tentacles. It has 8. We can count them. Why are you still trying to convince us that it has 80? Now, to be fair, its Sun Dex entry says normally it has 80 poisonous tentacles. The longer one has been alive, the fewer tentacles it will have. But you could hatch a Tentacool and then rare candy it up to evolution within 5 minutes, and it will evolve into a Tentacruel with only 8 tentacles. Quit saying there's 80. Oddish's Scarlet entry says its scientific name is Audium Wanderus. It is said to cover distances as far as 1,000 feet when night falls, walking on its 2 roots. Once again, this is one that has been mentioned in the past. However, only in Fire Red and Y. And I played Leaf Green and X, so that's why I completely missed this. I caught an Oddish and saw Audium Wanderus. Not only Pokemon have scientific names, but it's Audium Wanderus. It's so silly. And also really interesting because have Pokemon had scientific names the whole time? Galarian Slowpoke's Violet entry says it uses its tail to fish, but the scent of the spice emanating from its tail ensures its catches are always lacking. As I've mentioned, Dex entries that talk about a Pokemon being bad at something always tickle me. Galarian Slowbro's Scarlet entry says, Shelter seems blissful over the taste of Slowbro, even though the toxins seeping from the bite have caused Shelter to faint. Then its Violet entry says, Shelter bites down hard on Slowbro's arm to suck out more poison. This seems to cause itching, so Slowbro occasionally lashes out. So basically, the Shelter's a drug addict, it is blissfully catatonic and has lost its sense of self, and then the Slowbro is regularly agitated by the Shelter biting it. What the hell is going on? Like, whatever the opposite of a symbiotic relationship is, that's what this Pokemon is. Galarian Slowking's Scarlet entry says, it administers its potions to weakened Pokemon it sees. These potions are derived from poison and secreted from holes in Slowking's horns. Okay, seems nice, but its Violet entry says it creates potions by mixing toxins with the food it's eaten. Not even Slowking itself knows what effects the potions will have. So Slowking is just handing out random drugs to weakened Pokemon and doesn't know what they're gonna do? Are you kidding me? Those commercials that are like, don't do drugs, and there's like, hey kid, you want something? Those people are real, and it's Galarian Slowking. It seems both Galarian Slowbro and Slowking should be cautionary tales in DARE classes. Just say no to the slow, kids. Inkay's Violet entry says, being upside down improves its blood flow and clears its mind, causing the power of its psychic moves to increase dramatically. Inkay is always turned upside down to attack, and you have to turn your console upside down to evolve it, but we've never really had a lore explanation for why, but now we do. It improves blood flow and increases its psychic power. Dewpider's Violet entry says, it supports the water bubble that envelops its head with 3 of its legs. Sometimes it secretly swaps which legs are holding up the bubble. Until I read this Dex entry, I did not realize that those were legs. I thought they were just like antenna or horns or something. The fact that it can swap them when no one's looking just really tickles me. Hitmontop's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is adept at dance-like kicks. The horn atop its head is made from the same substance that generally forms fur and claws. That substance is keratin, and I think it's interesting that they specifically mention it. Then its Violet entry says, it spins on its horn while dealing out elegant kicks. Its horn grows continuously throughout its lifetime. This is the first time it's mentioned that Hitmontop's horn continually grows, but it also tickles me a bit because I think about a really old Hitmontop having just a preposterously long horn that it could never balance on. Male Meowstic's Violet entry says, if Meowstic continuously emits its powerful psychic energy, it will damage its own body. That's not great. Meteor Form Minior's Violet entry says, it will react when touched or called to, but it's unknown whether such responses indicate consciousness. Wait, hold on, we're not sure if Minior is conscious? It's a little unclear whether they're just referring to the Meteor form here, but like, it responds to commands. Then the Core Form's Violet entry says, Minior that fall to the ground try to return to space, but their wish will not come true. All they can do is fade away. What the hell? Why are these Dex entries so mean to Minior? The first one is like, yeah, we're not sure if it's even conscious. And then the second one's like, its wish will never come true. It will never return to its home. It will die here. And so Like, why? It's so cute. Why be so mean? And also, like, are all Minior just like actively dying? Okay, I guess technically all living things are like actively getting closer to death, but it's like all it can do is fade away. That's so bleak. Hisuian quillfish's Scarlet entry says it lives just offshore in cold parts of the world. Its poisonous spikes are thicker and shorter than those of other regions' quillfish. I like this. This explains how Hisuian quillfish can still be around in modern times. It's only found in exceptionally cold water, and it's only found in the waters of the polar biome of the terrarium. Duraludon's Violet entry says its metal body is durable but prone to retaining heat. It vents this heat from the slits in its tail. I just thought this was a fun little biology fact. That's why the slits are there. Archaludon's Scarlet entry says it gathers static electricity from its surroundings. The beams it launches when down on all fours are tremendously powerful. I just think it's funny that Archaludon has to get down on all fours to launch any attacks. You know, really drives home the, look, I'm a bridge. Hydrapple's Scarlet entry says 7 Syrpints live inside an apple made of syrup. The Syrpint in the center is the commander. First off, 7? I was expecting 2 because there were 2 of them in Dipplin. I lost my mind when my shiny one evolved and all the other heads popped out. I was like, excuse me? Oh my God, like where did the other 5 come from? Here it is. I haven't seen this before. What are you? Whoa! But also I wanted to draw attention to the usage of the word Syrpint, S-Y-R-P-E-N-T. That spelling is intentional, I believe, to show it's a combination of serpent and worm. It looks like worm to me, but that's an old word for a dragon. So it's like, look, it's a snake and a dragon. And also sort of a worm too. Then its Violet entry says these capricious Syrpints have banded together. On the rare occasion that their moods align, their true power is unleashed. Capricious means prone to mood swings. You may have already known that, but I didn't. So I thought I would explain for those of you who had identical vocabularies to me. But also this explains its signature move, Fickle Beam. Most of the time, Fickle Beam is only 80% power, but 30% of the time it will double to 160. So apparently the rare occasion where their moods align is 30% of the time. Swampert's Violet entry says Swampert's arms are rock hard. With one swing, they can batter down Swampert's foes. This Pokemon makes its nest on beautiful beaches. This is another one that has technically been mentioned in the past, but I missed it because the note about it making its nest on beautiful beaches was only brought up in Fire Red and Leaf Green, which I don't know about you, that's a game I didn't put a Swampert in. But on that point, Swampert builds its nest on beautiful beaches, not in, I don't know, swamps? I know the Hoenn region's got a lot of beautiful beaches, but like, this still took me by surprise. Oshawott Violet entry says, it's said that Oshawott learned to maintain its Scalchop with riverbed stones by mimicking humans it saw using whetstones. This is the first mention of Oshawott mimicking humans, and that's interesting because it leads into Duott's Scarlet entry. It's said that people modeled swordplay after the way Duott's movements flow like water while it's wielding its 2 Scalchops. So Oshawott copied us, and then we copied Duott. And I just think that's a cool little symbiotic teaching relationship. Samurant's Scarlet entry says, a master of a sword drawing art called Aiajutsu. Definitely butchered that, sorry. Samurant settles its battles with a single swing of either large sword sheathed in its 4-leg armor. Again, sorry, probably gonna butcher the pronunciation on this, but Aiajutsu is a real thing. Wikipedia says it's a combative quick draw sword technique. This art of drawing the Japanese sword, katana, is one of the Japanese Koryu martial art disciplines in the education of the classical warrior. Delphox's Scarlet entry says it leaves burn marks in the ground with the flame at the tip of its wand. Long ago, people used the shapes of these burn marks for divination. Other entries say Delphox could see into the future, but this is the first mention of people using what Delphox created to do the same. Or at least, trying to. Greninja's Violet entry says it makes shuriken out of mucus excreted from its thighs. These shuriken can cut cleanly through steel cables. Hold on. Mucus? Excreted from its thighs? Its X version Dex entry said they were made from compressed water. You mean to tell me that this Pokemon's signature move should not be called Water Shuriken, but Snot Star? Okay, yes, I understand that snot is nasal mucus specifically. I really liked the alliteration. But anyways, like, That attack just got way grosser. Rillaboom's Scarlet entry says, though it has a calm disposition, it won't tolerate those who drum up discord. It strictly disciplines offenders until they learn their lesson. It seems whoever wrote this dex entry has a taste for wordplay, because a previous dex entry says Rillaboom, it appreciates harmony. You know, that's not new information. But this writer specifically inserted the phrase drum up. And I gotta say, I respect it. Raboot's Violet entry says, while it prides itself on its varied kicking moves, it can also deliver powerful headbutts once its flames have heated up its forehead. It appears Raboot knows how to do headers. Inteleon's Violet entry says, it may present itself as being well-mannered, but deep down, it still has a lazy side. It will slack off when its trainer isn't looking. This is the first mention of Inteleon being lazy like Drizzile is. Gouging Fire's Scarlet entry says, there are scant few reports of this creature being sighted. One short video shows it rampaging and spouting pillars of flame. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused here. Who possibly got this thing on video? Iron Crown's Scarlet entry says it resembles a mysterious object introduced in a paranormal magazine as a cutting-edge weapon shaped like a Cobalion. All the entries that mention a paranormal magazine should be taken with a grain of salt, but I do think it's interesting that they said it's a weapon shaped like Cobalion and not a modified Cobalion. You know, they just built a robot to look like Cobalion. But then Iron Boulder's Scarlet entry says it resembles a Pokemon described in a dubious magazine as a Terrakion that had been modified by an evil organization. Okay, so Iron Crown just looks like Cobalion, but Iron Boulder is actually a modified Terrakion? I don't know what to believe here. Also, what is this evil organization? Like another Team Rocket in the future? Team like Super Rainbow Rocket? I don't know. Iron Leaf's Violet entry says, according to the few eyewitness accounts that exist, it used its shining blades to julienne large trees and boulders. Julienne means to cut into thin strips. How do you julienne a boulder? Next, I have dex entries for Terrapagos, which has 6 in total, and I'm gonna cover 4 of them. Its normal form Scarlet entry says, Terrapagos protects itself using its power to transform energy into hard crystals. This Pokemon is the source of the terrestrial phenomenon. This tiny baby is the source for the whole shindig across multiple regions. Wild. Its normal form Violet entry says, it's thought that this Pokemon lived in ancient Paldea until it got caught in seismic shifts and went extinct. This seems to imply there were a lot more of them in ancient Paldea. Only one has survived. Which if that's the case, was there just like a lot more crystals? Its terrestrial form Violet entry says, the shell is made of crystallized terrestrial energy. When struck by a move, the shell absorbs the move's energy and transfers it to Terrapagos. This is the explanation for its ability Terra Shell, which makes it so that any hit that strikes it when it has full HP is not very effective, which is essentially just multi-scale. And then its stellar form Scarlet entry says, in this form, Terrapagos resembles the world as the ancients saw it, and its terrestrial energy is abnormally amplified. Okay. Resembles the world as the ancients saw it. Really goes hard as a phrase. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out another one of my videos, you totally should. You can do this one right here. I think it's a really good video. I make great videos. It's a lot of fun. But anyways, that's all I have for now. So until next time, Boogie fans, gotta catch them all.